The Comforting Christmas by Susan Hatler. Copyright Susan Hatler 2023. Audiobook copyright Susan Hatler 2024. Chapter 1. My current gig, waiting tables at Danica's, wasn't my dream career, but it had just helped me take a step in the right direction. Serving customers at this upscale restaurant wasn't a bad job per se. I mean, the tips were good, the people were friendly, and it kept me actively on my feet. But in my heart, I had different aspirations than being a server at this charming restaurant on the lake in my small mountain town of Whitefish, Montana. Ever since I was a little girl, I'd been enchanted by the idea of planning events, like a tea party or a wedding or a New Year's Eve bash. No event would be too big or too small. I loved the magic that happened when people gathered around decorations and appetizers and themed cocktail napkins. Most especially, I wanted to be the mastermind behind such events. Michele Griffin, event planner extraordinaire. I'd imagined a gazillion different business card designs with this title under my name. Okay, maybe I'd have to leave the word extraordinaire off the title to be more professional. But still, I always got the warm fuzzies when I thought about it. Then this morning, I was scrolling on social media while enjoying my morning coffee, and my gaze locked on a blue sky and white cloud fettered meme that read, "If not now, when?" Those 4 words immediately haunted my brain. At 29 years old, why was I still waiting tables instead of pursuing being an event planner? Actually, it didn't matter why. There was no need to worry about why it had taken me this long to get it. I wanted to be an event planner, so now was the time to get after it. With that in mind, I arrived early to work before my dinner shift and appointed myself the head of decor here at Danica's. With Christmas mere weeks away, I went into the storage shed and sifted through boxes of long-forgotten holiday decorations. My boss wasn't a Scrooge or anything, so we did have a respectable Christmas tree in the dining room already. But it wasn't nearly enough when my creativity was brewing. Within a couple of hours, I had decked the place out with miniature Christmas trees trimmed with white and silver ornaments, and lots of tinsel, mistletoe over the doorway, and fir boughs on the siding of the interior walls. The festive decorations added to the rustic, cozy feel of the space, and the holiday theme was boosted in spades by the steady snow falling outside. Feeling proud of my hard work elevating the holiday cheer in here, I wiped my hands before changing into my black pants and black button-up shirt for my shift. As customers arrived, ordered, and left, the words from that meme replayed in my head, "If not now, when?" As I cleared a table at the back of the restaurant, stacking plates on my arm like a pro, I thought back to my teenage years. I'd spent hours in the general store reading glossy how-to-entertain magazines I couldn't afford to buy, while visualizing the parties I would throw once I had the friends, the time, and of course, the resources to do so. I imagined my life would be filled with backyard soirees and elegant luncheons. That so didn't happen. Despite my social media boards full of hosting tips, I rarely had anyone over to the tiny apartment I rented, since there wasn't a lot of space for entertaining in my cramped bachelorette pad. At this point in my life, maybe I should already own my own place, but that required more than my meager savings account allowed. Sigh. Setting dirty dishes in the kitchen sink, I swiftly returned to the dining room and took an order from a customer who was eating alone while reading a book. "Hey George," I said to the regular I knew well. "Good evening, Michele," he said without taking his gaze from the page. "The usual?" I asked, unable to resist a smile, knowing he always ordered the pot roast. "If it ain't broke, no need to fix it." "Pot roast coming right up," I said, slipping my notepad into my back pocket before putting his order in with the kitchen. As I walked back into the dining room, I overheard a couple giving compliments to the host on our Christmas decorations. A warm rush of pleasure flooded my chest at the smiles on their faces. Feeling proud that my efforts had been noticed, I took a few more orders with an even peppier skip in my step. But one afternoon of decorating didn't make me an event planner, so my excitement quickly faded. As I cleared another table, I found myself wishing my salary was big enough to purchase a house with enough space for the kinds of lavish parties I'd always longed to throw. So much for the glamorous life. If not now, when? Arg. I had to do more than embellish the holiday decorations at Danica's. But what? I blew dark wisps of hair away from my eyes as our line cook slid a bacon burger onto the counter and rang the order-up bell. I balanced plate after plate on my arms as I weaved my way through the bustling tables, smiling at every patron whose eye I caught along the way. Being personable was a part of this job, and it played a big role in determining whether or not I got tipped at the end of a meal. Good thing I loved being social. Since our town was so small, I knew most of the local customers by name. In addition to the locals, we served truckloads of tourists who came to visit Big Mountain for hiking in the summer and skiing in the winter. I smiled at a regular, who was a single mom and always brought coloring books and crayons for her 2 children while they enjoyed their Sunday dinner with us. Then I nodded to the elderly couple who often dined here and always held hands throughout every meal, still in love after all this time. So sweet. When I turned around, I noticed Holly and Dave come through the front door, and my heart warmed at seeing my favorite couple. I loved Holly like a sister, and she had earned the title of best friend 10 times over during the years I had known her. We had met in the local bookstore years ago, when we had both reached for the last copy of a cozy mystery by our favorite author. That had sparked a long conversation about books and life that had never really ended. She was my closest friend and knew the most about me. Well, as long as you didn't count my hairstylist, Delilah. What was it about a hairstylist that made you want to tell them your life story and also listen to theirs? Huh. Anyway, Dave was Holly's perfect match, a real stand-up guy with a heart of gold. They had enjoyed their first date together here at Danica's, and I had helped plot a surprise wedding for them on the back deck with its gorgeous view of Whitefish Lake. So romantic. They used to drop by the restaurant often for pie and coffee, but not since their babies had arrived. As I dropped off a double order of biscuits and gravy at a table, I saw them get seated at their favorite spot by the fire, and then I scooted over in their direction. I didn't know you were coming in tonight, I said, sidling up beside Holly on her side of the linen-covered table. I tilted my head, giving her a knowing smile. How's life treating you? Not sleeping enough, but my heart is full, she said, holding her pudgy son, little Joe, in her arms. Adorable. Hey, Michele. Dave nodded to me as he strapped an infant car seat onto the chair next to him that held their adorable baby girl, Sophia, who had been named in honor of Dave's tough-as-nails and sweet-as-pie Italian grandmother. Sophia was snuggled in her car seat and snoozing like an angel. How are you doing? That's a complicated question, I said, not wanting to tell him that a social media meme had made me realize I'd been doing zilch toward my dream since I'd graduated high school. Cringe. Care to elaborate on that? Holly asked, looking concerned. Maybe later, I said, stealing a peek at their beautiful baby girl. Staring at that sweet little face, I vowed to let Sophia know how fast life moved and that she needed to pursue her dreams right away in order to make them a reality. At the very least, she should take strides toward her dream, even if they are small steps. Otherwise, she might wake up and be 29 and still working a job that was supposed to be just for now. I couldn't let her make this same mistake. I'd definitely tell her all of this, once she learned how to talk. You're making me nervous, Holly said, giving me a look. Don't worry about me, I said, not wanting to be responsible for making a tired woman worry. Just peruse the menu and let me know what your taste buds are craving tonight. She sighed. Okay. We'll talk when you're older, I whispered, backing away from Sophia. Holly and Dave looked happy together, albeit exhausted. But the dark circles under their eyes were obviously worth the joy that the children brought into their life. The two babies were practically twins, even though Joe was their biological son and Sophia was adopted. Two at once seemed like a handful to me, but Holly and Dave's eyes shined with love whenever they looked at their children, which caused a little ache in my chest. I hoped to be this happy one day. But my tiny town wasn't exactly bursting with eligible bachelors. In fact, I had gone to school with most of them, or had known them long enough to watch them crash and burn multiple relationships, making me want to steer clear. "What can I get started for you, Dave?" I asked, noticing a new table I needed to clear. "I'll have the fried cod," he said. "And I'll take the veggie pasta, please," Holly said, rubbing her nose against little Joe's forehead. They named little Joe after Holly's dad, Joe, who had passed away. Holly's dad was the reason she'd fallen in love with whitefish and moved here. I had looked at the sky and thanked him numerous times for bringing Holly to our small town. "Yes, I love you." "Yes, I do," Holly said to little Joe before glancing up at me. "Can I get extra grated Parmesan on top of my pasta, please? It's been an extra cheese kind of a day." "You got it. Coming right up, lovebirds." I wove my way back toward the kitchen, holding empty dishes with one arm while picking up check folders with my other hand as I headed to the kitchen. The key to being good at this job was having the ability to go into multitasking hyperdrive and never slowing down until the shift was over, unless cute babies were involved. Making up for the lost time, I sped up, turning the corner tightly, and then, "Oof!" I exclaimed, crashing into my boss, Dylan Scott, my forehead knocking into his chin in a not-so-gracious way. "I'm so sorry," I said, glancing up at him. My tummy did a cartwheel. Dylan was much taller than me, with beautiful chestnut hair brushed back neatly, amber brown eyes with black flecks, and a mouth that would have been more appealing if he wasn't frowning so often. He'd owned and operated Danica's ever since his dad had passed the restaurant to him in his will. I had a secret crush on him, but he was, putting it lightly, a little too uptight. "Michele," he said, clearing his throat and straightening his cuffs. "There you are? Listen, Table 23 sent their order back to the kitchen, saying the steak wasn't rare enough." "I told the kitchen to serve that steak to them still mooing," I said, stepping back from Dylan and feeling relieved I hadn't dropped any dishes. I blew the bangs out of my eyes. It wasn't bloody enough for them? Apparently not. His gaze followed my hair a moment, making me wonder if my bangs were sticking up now. "Will you see to it that the order is remade properly?" "Of course I'm on it," I said, letting out a sigh. Dylan was a good guy, and he had always been a fair boss, but whenever he made his rounds in the dining room to ask how guests were enjoying their meal, more often than not, somebody found something I'd done wrong. Picky patrons who liked to complain were my least favorite part of this whole waiting tables thing. I wanted to make people happy and did my best, but there always seemed to be someone dissatisfied with me. "Hey, don't let them get to you," Dylan said, seeming to notice the mental battle going on inside my head. As always, his encouragement was brusque but welcome. "Just move on to the next thing, all right?" "All right," I said, feeling slightly better as I turned ready to drop these dishes into the kitchen sink, run credit cards and return bill folders to tables before picking up fresh orders from the kitchen. But then, Dylan touched my wrist and all of the air rushed out of my lungs. I froze from the contact, my brain short-circuiting as my gaze dropped to my skin that was still tingling from where his fingers had just brushed. I knew I shouldn't have this reaction to an innocent touch from Dylan. He was my boss, after all, and he could be a total wet blanket when the pressure was on in the restaurant. But I wasn't oblivious to the fact that he was around my age, unmarried, and extremely good-looking. It didn't help that he had a grounding sort of presence that kept me tethered to reality on the days when things got truly crazy out on the floor. There was also something way too appealing about the way he seemed to notice when the pressure was getting to me. I said, my heart rate kicking up as I stared at my wrist and fought the strong urge I had to lean in and kiss him. Obviously, I restrained. There was nothing inappropriate about his slight touch at all, but I couldn't remember the last time Dylan had touched me, if ever. "Can I talk to you after your shift?" he asked, his eyes suddenly earnest. "It will only take a few minutes, and then you're free to go." "Sure," I said, wondering what was up. "Thanks," he said, and then swept away to check on more tables, leaving cool air to swirl around my wrist where his fingers had brushed so briefly. I bit my bottom lip, staring at the hot band of skin that continued to tingle long after Dylan had moved on. I was losing it, that was all there was to it. There was nothing between Dylan and me, and it was ridiculous to have this kind of reaction to my boss, yet he had starred in my dreams on more occasions than I'd care to admit. Obviously, I just needed to get back out there and go on a real date again, then my subconscious could stop wishing for things that weren't there with my boss. As much as I knew this rationally, it didn't keep butterflies from winging around in my stomach for the rest of my shift. Chapter 2. I worked my tail off for the rest of my shift at Danica's, flittering from table to table, taking orders, refilling drinks, collecting credit cards, and pocketing my tips. Eventually, the final patron waved goodbye and headed out the door into the wintry wonderland outside, and I was left with a few other members of the staff to clean and lock up. I wiped down the tables, stacked the dishes in the kitchen, and then went to find Dylan. Dylan's office was a small, unassuming room in the back of the restaurant, but he kept it tidy. He sat opposite me behind his desk, his fingers laced together, before he gestured for me to sit. I lowered myself into the only free chair in the room, a creaking thing on wheels upholstered in leather. The door, of course, was left cracked for propriety's sake. "Thanks for staying late to chat with me," he said, his voice calm like usual, but something seemed to be brewing in his amber-brown eyes, and I wondered what was up. "I know things get wild around here during the holidays, and I hate to ask you to do more work, but I was hoping you could help me out with something." I raised my eyebrows. After all, I was already in the habit of picking up double shifts whenever I could to pad my paycheck, and I was feeling spread thin. Plus, the weight of that meme had taken up residency in my head, and I needed to do something about it. As much as I'd love to help out a person in need, I braced myself to tell Dylan that I couldn't pick up more hours or stay to close more often. With a little guilt in my belly, I lifted my head. "Listen, Dylan, I'm already slammed. If you need more hands to lighten the load, you need to hire more servers. I'm only one person." "No, that's not what I'm talking about," he said, waving away my concerns. "It's something else. I'm talking about the benefit dinner on Christmas Eve." My ears perked up. Every year, Danica's catered a swanky Christmas benefit dinner at the historical Hawthorne Hotel on Main Street. We put on the benefit in partnership with the local food banks, raising money to help provide local down-on-their-luck families with healthy food all winter long. The benefit dinner we threw was a little outdated, in my opinion, and had been decorated and catered the exact same way since I was a kid, but the event always brought the community together. I worked the dinner every year, so my view of the night was skewed. I didn't get to enjoy the wining and dining because I was busy running around in a starched shirt, serving up appetizers on gleaming silver platters. "What about the benefit dinner?" I asked. Dylan heaved a sigh, massaging his brow with his fingers, the same fingers that had brushed my wrist not long ago. "Focus, Michele. Focus." I cleared my throat, wondering how late he expected us to stay at the dinner this year. Dylan was almost always the first person to arrive and the last person to leave on any given workday. It was hard to feel put upon by how hard he wanted his employees to work when he worked harder than any of us. "We've hit a bit of a snag," he said, keeping his gaze on mine. "The event planner dropped out. She's taking indefinite maternity leave and won't be available for the rest of the month." "Oh, I see," I said, understanding that a parent would want to be at home with their baby as long as they could. Does that mean the benefit has been canceled? Not exactly, he said, shaking his head. It means the benefit will fall apart if we don't get another event planner in here, and fast. The problem is, she was the only event planner in town, and if I call one of the bigger cities and try to get someone to drive out here and handle things, we're going to be entirely priced out. So I figured I would look a little closer to home. Oh, that makes sense, I said, wondering who he had in mind. He gave me an expectant look. Keeping my gaze on his, I moved my chin from side to side, trying to figure out what that look meant. Closer to home? What did he mean? And then my stomach bubbled with worry as it hit me. I put a hand to my chest. Wait, are you talking about me? That's right, he said with a nod. I heard you telling someone earlier that you upped the decorations here because you enjoy planning festivities and decorating. I know you planned Jackie's daughter's birthday party, and from what I heard, you did a great job. Look, I was just babbling earlier. And that birthday party was just a favor to a friend, I said, holding up my palms as a feeling of fright took hold of me. I couldn't kid anyone. I was not a professional event planner. Jackie was one of my favorite coworkers, and since becoming widowed last year, she had her hands full with her two beautiful little girls. True, I had offered to plan her daughter's birthday party as a way to help out Jackie, and I had ended up paying for decorations out of my own pocket to help ease the burden on her. She had been eternally grateful, and I was proud of the work I had done with some pink and blue streamers and a couple of unicorn balloons, but it was far from a professional job. A voice in the back of my mind whispered this opportunity from Dylan was exactly what I'd been wanting, but I shook my head. I needed to take a step toward my dream, not jump in all at once and mess things up so badly that my dream would never become a reality. I wasn't ready. No, not even close. I just pulled decorations from storage earlier. And there were only like 6 kids in attendance at that party, Dylan, I said, counting off the names of the kids on my fingers. And they were 5-year-olds, who are easily pleased with a bottle of bubbles and a yo-yo. Michele, listen. The Christmas benefit usually involves close to 100 people, easy, I said, pretty sure he didn't understand the gravity of what he was asking. That's 100 plus adults with expectations, and bubbles aren't going to cut it with them. Don't worry, he said, his tone annoyingly calm. The previous event planner emailed over her notes from last year. Oh, that was golden. Her very outdated notes from decades ago were what he thought would save me. Not likely. Sorry, Dylan. I'm not qualified, I said, starting to stand up. Hang on, Michele. Hear me out, he said, his tone neutral as always. I really just need a point person to handle the planning so I can focus on the food, and so no one from the charity organization needs to worry about things like seating charts and centerpieces. I blinked, wondering if I could handle being a point person. I mean, I was a server who couldn't make a customer happy with a barely cooked steak. How was I supposed to pull off being a point person, whatever that meant? I'm worried I'd disappoint you, Dylan, I said, wanting to bite my tongue. I mean, the charity organization. I'm worried I'll disappoint them and make you look bad. I have full faith in you, Michele, he said, his voice steady, which made a soft calm settle over me. You would just be the point person. The point person, huh? I said, thinking that didn't sound all that scary. Exactly. If you want, you can follow her instructions to the letter and do exactly what she did last year. No harm, no foul. Or, he leaned forward a little bit, pinning me in place with his gaze. I was suddenly aware that we were alone together in here, with only each other for company, door open or not. Anything could happen between us, and no one would be the wiser. The thought made my belly do a little dance. Or, I prompted, gripping my purse a little tighter in my lap. Or you could really go to town and make this event your own. Jackie mentioned that you're super into event planning. I know it's a skill you don't get to use much in the restaurant, outside of decorating for Christmas, which, by the way, you really outdid yourself on this afternoon. Thank you, I said, the compliment causing my heart to feel happier than it had felt in a long, long time. Since she says you're full of inspiration, I thought it might be nice to give you a little creative freedom, he said, leaning back in his chair again, before waving his hand. You'd have a budget, of course, but total free reign over the event. All I ask is that you keep things classy and make sure everyone who comes to the benefit has a good experience. 2 words kept winging around my brain: free reign. You're seriously okay just signing over all this responsibility to me? I asked, a little breathlessly. I would be lying if I didn't admit that the mere thought of being given full creative control over a big event like this made me all giddy inside. But that growing excitement didn't change the fact that I was unprepared. On the other hand, I never imagined that a chance like this would just drop into my lap, especially on the day I read that meme. I was a server, for goodness sake. I might know more about event planning than the average person, but that didn't make me a professional. Michele, you're one of the most responsible people I know, Dylan said, giving me a small smile. His smiles were rare and more valuable because of it. My chest warmed like someone had lit a candle inside my heart. You never miss a shift, you're always here to help, and you have an interest in throwing parties. You're the natural choice. So, what do you say? I took a deep breath, lacing my fingers together in my lap, my mind racing. Can I have some time back from the shifts I've been picking up to handle the event planning? I asked, knowing I'd need that time if I had a chance of pulling this off well. Of course, Dylan said with a nod. Phew. I was glad he wasn't going to ask me to keep picking up shifts while also balancing throwing an entire benefit. He might be tough, but he was always fair. Does that mean you're in? He asked. I bit my bottom lip. If not now, when? I'll do it, I said, my stomach filled with excitement and nerves. But if I was going to take this rather large step toward being a professional, I needed to act like one. Forward me over the documents from the previous event planner, send me the details for the budget, and I'll handle this event. You don't have to worry about the benefit anymore, Dylan. I'm on it. Thank goodness, he said, letting out a whoosh of a sigh. He reached across the desk as though he were going to pat my hand, and then seemed to think better of it. He pressed his lips together and withdrew his hand before standing up. You've really saved my neck on this one. I was starting to worry the benefit wouldn't happen this year. He held out his hand and I gave it a firm shake, full of promise and determination. You can trust me with this, I said, knowing that I would live up to those words if it killed me. This is going to be the best benefit in recent memory. All I ask is that it all comes together in the end, he said with another smile, as if he had a secret. Was I imagining things, or did he smile more around me than anyone else? You've got nearly 4 weeks to pull the party together in time for Christmas. I believe in you. I appreciate your faith in me, I said, beaming from ear to ear. Then I lifted my purse, left his office, and headed out to my car. Once I slid inside, I cranked up the heat, rubbing my hands together as I gazed back at Danica's. The charming restaurant looked picturesque with the accumulated snow, like a gingerbread house sprinkled with powdered sugar. I fished my phone out of my pocket and scrolled back through my contacts until I found my mom. My finger hovered over the call button. I gnawed on my lip, deliberating. We hadn't spoken in close to a year since the blowout argument that now seems silly and childish, but I thought she might appreciate hearing about me finally landing my first real event planning gig. After all, she was the one to help me cut out pictures from glossy home magazines and then tape them up on my bedroom wall when I was a teen. She was the one who had played tea party with me and my stuffed animals when I was in grade school. But I was still too stubborn to be the first one to reach out. The gulf between us was too wide to be fixed with a simple phone call, so even though my heart ached to share this news with her, I slipped the phone back in my pocket. I told myself that I didn't need my mom's approval or enthusiasm in order to perform this opportunity well. I was going to do the best job ever on this event, and it was going to set me up for my dream job in the future. I was determined, and I was capable, and I was going to make this happen. "Thanks, Dylan," I murmured, giving Danica's one last glance before I put my car into gear and drove slowly toward home with the snow falling lightly and Christmas lights twinkling all around me. Chapter 3. I spent the next week furiously mood-boarding and color palette arranging. I called the closest party store in the larger town about 30 minutes away and grilled them relentlessly about what napkin colors they could provide, the sheen of their balloons, and how many weighted centerpieces they could deliver in the crunched timeframe Dylan had given me. When I agreed to plan the benefit, I had assumed I had plenty of time, but I now realized the 3 weeks I had left were meager at best. The budget Dylan had provided was sufficient for what I wanted to do, but just barely. He had written out his business credit card information on a sticky note during one of my shifts and delivered it to me with instructions to put whatever expenses I needed to on the card. I was flush with power and potential, and it was a little overwhelming. During the second week of the countdown to the benefit, I visited the historical Hawthorne Hotel banquet hall with Dylan during the afternoon to get a sense of what we were working with. I had never paid special attention to the space while I was serving, and I needed to take note of how many doorways would need boughs of holly strung over them, how many alcoves would need mini Christmas trees set up inside, and how many tables we were going to fit into the hall. Today, Dylan needed to join me at the hotel to plan out the catering flow, and he offered to give me a lift from the restaurant. It was perfectly reasonable and very polite of him to offer, but I couldn't help the little tremor in my stomach as I slid into his truck. It was, unsurprisingly, clean and scented by a little minty tree hanging from the rearview mirror. I had never been in his truck before, and something about getting driven around by him felt intimate. "How's the benefit planning coming along?" he asked, making pleasant small talk as we drove toward the hotel. It wasn't far, but we had to go slow because of the black ice on the road, drawing out the ride even longer. At least, that's why I assumed Dylan was going so slow. I couldn't think of another reason why he might want to spend more time alone with me, not without letting my imagination run wild. "The planning is going great," I said, holding my purse against my chest as we rolled over a couple of potholes. My purse was bursting with paint swatches I had lifted from the hardware store and a handwritten notebook full of clippings from magazines and notes about how the decor I had in mind was going to complement the evening's theme and mission. I settled on mulberry and metallic gold, accented with royal purple, all highlighted by the ample greenery I wanted to fill the room with. I had no shortage of experience stretching a dollar, and I was determined to steward the money Dylan had entrusted me with well. "I'm glad things are going smoothly," he said, glancing over at me. "I knew you were the perfect person for the job. I'm excited to see the space through your eyes and learn more about your vision." He shot me a sidelong glance, his lips touched by a slight smile, and it occurred to me that maybe he was nervous to have me in his truck too. Was he worried about crossing a boundary and making me uncomfortable? Or was there something more to it? "Can't wait to show you," I said, making myself sound confident, even though, truth be told, I was starting to feel like I was drowning in ideas and not executing enough on them. "What's the menu looking like this year?" "Same as every year," he said, turning down the road to the Hawthorne Hotel. We pulled up alongside the street, parking directly in front of the historical building. Roast duck for the carnivores and asparagus gnocchi for the vegetarians, green bean casserole, scalloped potatoes, and bread pudding with ice cream for dessert. Keeping it simple and timeless. "Sounds delicious," I said. "And," Dylan added with a tone in his voice that I didn't recognize. Was he trying to make a joke? Lots and lots of wine. I let out a little laugh. All right, usually serious Dylan, way to change it up on me. I guess everyone was full of their own surprises. We headed into the hotel together, walking side by side. The concierge smiled at us. Can I help you, sir and madam? My cheeks heated. It was impossible to miss the fact that the concierge had just assumed we were a couple. Did we look like a couple? I assessed us with new eyes. Dylan was dressed in his usual straight-leg jeans and pressed button-down shirt, and I was wearing a breathable cotton dress over leggings. He looked like a software engineer, and I probably looked more like a yoga instructor. But we were both around the same age, and neither of us wore a wedding ring. Did we really look like a matching set? We're all right, thanks, Dylan said pleasantly, and it didn't escape my notice that he hadn't corrected the man. Probably because he was focused on work and felt that the error didn't really matter. I mean, why else wouldn't he set him straight? Appreciate the offer to help, but I know my way to the banquet hall. We wove through the wood-paneled hallways of the ground floor of the hotel, passing oil paintings and little stained-glass windows. The hawthorn was a cross between a rustic hunting lodge and a 1920s Art Deco dream, and I had always been enchanted by it. The banquet hall was pretty standard, a long room with tall windows that could be used for conferences, dances, or dinners. The moment I stepped foot in the room, my gears started turning. I could visualize the intimate round tables, the centerpieces of spruce, holly, and purple ribbons, the golden bells I wanted to hang over the main doorway. I stepped further into the room, beginning to scribble furiously in my journal. Ribbons, we needed more ribbons. And mistletoe for the entryway, of course. I looked up after a few minutes to find Dylan watching me with the strangest expression on his face. It was almost soft, like he was delighted by what he was seeing. The moment I made eye contact with him, his gaze shuddered, and he dropped his line of sight down to his shoes. I'll leave you to it, he said quickly. I need to go talk to the kitchen. Good luck. With that, he turned on his heel and left me in the banquet hall. I reeled in his absence. What had just happened? Was I totally losing it, or was there a little spark of something between us? Maybe I just needed to get back on the dreaded dating apps and go on a first date with someone who was not my boss, someone who was a lot less off-limits. I absolutely should not be nursing a crush on the guy who signed my paychecks, especially since the server gossip was that Dylan didn't date. Like anybody. Ever. He was married to his work, completely committed to running his restaurant, as if there wasn't room for anybody else in his perfectly ordered world. Focus, Michele. Getting back to work, I started sketching out a rough diagram of the room, drawing out little tables and chairs, and within a few minutes, I had a working sketch of the entire banquet hall. Already, I was wondering just how far I could make Dylan's budget go. Was there room in the finances for a little more decor, an extra special box of ornaments to decorate a live Christmas tree, or maybe even sprigs of spruce tucked into each napkin holder? I wanted the benefit to be absolutely magical, and I was willing to do everything within my power to make that happen, even if I had to DIY half of the decorations. Dylan returned from the kitchen, looking accomplished. Everyone is on the same page, he said. We're going to work like a finely oiled machine during the benefit, I'm sure of it. Oh, I almost forgot. You're going to need this. He reached into his pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. When I unfolded it, I saw it was a neatly typed guest list. At first, I was excited, but then my stomach quickly sank. A good event planner would know exactly who to seat next to who, but I didn't have any idea where to start. I don't know a lot of these people, I said, a little sheepishly. Do you need to know them? He asked, seeming genuinely confused. To seat them properly, I do, I said, biting my bottom lip. What happens if I put someone next to their high school nemesis? Or their ex-wife? I never thought of that, he said, a little quirk to his mouth that was halfway to a smile. I pretty much know everyone from helping to throw this benefit every year. You're obviously the guy they first need to talk to then, I said, not thinking much of it. I didn't mean to ask for more from him, or to suggest that we should be spending more time together outside of work. But then his eyebrows raised up toward his hairline. I'm happy to help, he said, his mouth twisting a little. I don't want to eat up more of your evenings, though, since you're already working so late most days. Why don't we grab coffee Saturday morning and we can go over the seating chart together? I'll tell you everything you need to know about who has history with who, and you can work your seating magic. Really? I said, a little taken aback at the coffee invitation. Absolutely. The coffee is on me, he said with a nod. Come on, I think they're looking to lock up the ballroom for the night. Can I give you a lift back to the restaurant? A coffee date? Business meeting over coffee. And now another ride with Dylan? I couldn't blame my heart rate for kicking up a notch, even if it was just my imagination. I'd like that, I said, unable to stop the smile from spreading across my face, knowing I liked the idea of spending more time with Dylan way more than I should. Chapter 4. Over the next week, the decorations I had ordered with Dylan's company credit card started showing up at Danica's. I'd used the restaurant as the shipping address because there was no way I had enough space in my little apartment to store all those wreaths, silver bells, ribbons, etc. I did my best to organize the orders when I wasn't serving, but luckily Dylan and the other employees at Danica's didn't seem to mind when I had to dash out to sign off for a package. How's it going? Dylan came over to me one day after closing as employees were cleaning tables, stacking chairs, washing dishes, and locking up. All good, I said, peering out from behind the giant box of ornaments I was carrying, my gaze connecting with those amber-brown eyes. Butterflies immediately began flapping in my belly. Business, I reminded myself. He was just talking about business. Dylan had been a huge help to me ever since we had sorted the seating chart over coffee, when I had done my best not to assign any meaning at how close he'd been sitting next to me. He had to sit close to me since we were having a conversation. Although he had chosen to sit next to me instead of across from me. Stop it, Michele. I shook my head to clear away those ridiculous thoughts. I can't wait to get all these decorations up in the banquet hall, I said, giving a nod to the box I held. Let's have a look and see what you're working with this time, Dylan said, sliding his hands under the box to take hold of it. Our fingers brushed as he did so, and the butterflies in my belly went wild. Yeah, sure, I said, my cheeks heating as he helped me set the box on a table. Why was I noticing him so much more lately, and thinking of him mostly in romantic ways? I had known Dylan for years, and he had always been a steadying presence in my life. And maybe I was imagining things, it felt like lately he was opening up a little bit more with me. He kept offering to give me rides from work to the banquet hall to drop off decorations, even though I could easily take them by myself. And he'd bought me coffee and helped me with the seating chart. There were the little gestures too, like the way he was showing interest in the box I'd been moving. Dylan wasn't a very demonstrative person with his words. Even as a boss, he wasn't one to dole out praise willy-nilly. But his actions showed what he cared about and what was important to him, and he had been acting like I was someone he cared about recently. Then again, maybe all this holiday cheer was going to my head. Christmas was one of the most magical times of the year, after all. Maybe I was caught up in the joyful season and wishing for something that wasn't even there. Biting my lip, I produced a pocket knife from my back pocket and used it to slice open the tape that secured the box shut. When I popped open the cardboard flaps, I was rewarded with gorgeous sets of red, purple, and gold glass ornaments inside. Some of them were opaque, some were see-through, and some were trimmed with glitter. They look even more beautiful than they did in the catalog, I said, exhilaration filling my chest. And it looks like none of them broke in transit. That's a good thing, Dylan said, peering over my shoulder. I was immediately aware of how close he was to me in the storeroom. Not inappropriately close, though. After all, Dylan was a good guy and would never do anything to make me uncomfortable. But he was close enough that I could reach out and touch him if I wanted to. If I were brave enough to. Yeah, I'm glad the ornaments arrived intact, I said, trying to control the random feelings flying around inside me. This was Dylan, my boss, the man who wore a frown more often than not. Although he wasn't wearing a frown right now. But still, he wasn't someone to get all melty about for no reason. I cleared my throat and pulled myself together. Anyway, now I just need to get the perfect tree. You're thinking of getting a big tree, right, to really fill the space? The banquet hall has a high ceiling. Exactly right, I said, glad that he and I were on the same page about this. A big tree was going to cut into the budget, but it was a Christmas banquet, and I couldn't go cheap on the Christmas tree. I'm sure manufacturers make trees that size. I just need to do a little research. Manufacturers? Dylan asked, tucking his hands into his pockets and giving me a look as if he must have heard me wrong. You're not thinking of getting a prefab tree, are you? Of course, I said with a chuckle. Prefabricated trees come in easy-to-transport boxes, and they don't require trekking through the woods to chop them down. I don't know if you thought otherwise, but I'm just one person, and I don't have an axe or a truck. Maybe you don't, he said, his tone casual. But I do. I blinked. Are you offering to take me to pick out a tree? If it would be helpful, then I'm happy to, he said, and a little pink color crept into his cheeks. I've got a little free time this weekend, and it would be a trip on benefit business. The Christmas tree farm that's about 20 minutes up the road has all sorts of fir trees to choose from, and I'm sure they would have one big enough for the banquet hall. But if you're not comfortable hanging out outside of work, I'm comfortable with it, I blurted, in a tone that sounded entirely too loud and excited. Nice, Michele. Way to play it smooth. I sucked in a breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I mean, I would love to go Christmas tree shopping with you for the sake of the benefit. I really appreciate you helping me out. Of course, he said, reaching out toward me. For a strange moment, I thought he might cradle my cheek in his hand, but then his hand seemed to redirect its course at the last minute, and he clasped me on the shoulder. I'm happy to help you out. You've already been such a big help to me, it's only fair. Right? That's really sweet of you, Dylan, I said, feeling my shoulder catch on fire from his touch. Wowzers. I'm free on Sunday afternoon. Does that work for you? Sunday it is, he said, the corner of his mouth tipping upward in a way that made him look like a kid about to open his presents on Christmas Day. You and I are going to pick out the prettiest tree in the whole forest, together. Yes, we will, I said, feeling so excited I could hardly wait. As it turned out, picking the prettiest tree in the whole forest involved a whole lot more hiking than I had anticipated. Dylan knew the owners of the Christmas tree farm up the road, and they let us do a little off-roading, as Dylan called it, which included stepping over the ropes that sectioned off the part of the farm open to the public, and trudging through the snow up the side of the hill to get to the part of the patch where the really big trees grew. I did my best huffing and puffing up the incline after Dylan, who seemed as sure-footed as a mountain goat. You sure you're doing all right? He glanced over his shoulder as we clambered over a fallen log. We can stop and rest if you need. I'm doing just fine, I called back, forcing a cheery tone to my voice so it wouldn't be the voice of someone who hadn't exercised much since all the bicycling last summer well before the snow had fallen. Never felt better. I don't believe that for a second, Dylan said, and then actually snorted at me. I laughed at the fact that he wouldn't even pretend to believe my cheery efforts. Maybe he knew me too well. A little shiver zipped up my spine at the thought. I took a deep breath, reminding myself this was all for work. I decided to concentrate on my footing. "We're almost there," he said a moment later. "Just a few more minutes." "Okay, fine, good," I said, since I wasn't fooling him anyway. He chuckled, giving me a side glance, and we exchanged a smile. My tummy warmed, and I felt the tingling of electricity between us. Obviously, my imagination was working overtime. Dylan led me up to the summit of the hill, where the trees grew tall and proud. They were so beautiful, covered in winter snow that looked like thick frosting. It wasn't totally wild country right here, and there were a few axes lying against an outbuilding, and a collection of sturdy sleds that were obviously there to help adventurous patrons transport their chosen tree down the hill after they chopped it down. Dylan hefted up an axe, for which I was grateful. I might know my way around a pocket knife, but an axe was a totally different story. He was definitely coming through as promised. "You pick the tree," he said, wearing a broad grin. "Me? I thought we were doing this together," I said, noticing that he had a nice smile. Like a really nice smile. I just never got to see it much. It felt like a rare bird sighting to witness a smile like that out in nature. He looked good in a smile. "I'll chop the tree down," he said, breaking me from my thoughts as he gripped the wooden handle. "That's my contribution." "You sure you're up to the task?" I joked, shaking my head so I could focus on the task at hand, and then kicking my shoes against a stump to dislodge the mud and ice from the grooves on my soles. "You don't think I'm strong enough?" he asked, a twinkle in his eyes. I couldn't help but smile back as I shrugged. "You might be overestimating your abilities, Dylan. I'm looking for a big tree for the banquet hall, not one of those scrawny Charlie Brown trees. It won't be easy to chop down." "You pick the tree you want, any tree, the bigger the better," he said, and he hefted the axe as if testing its weight. "And I'll cut it down." "Sounds like a plan," I said, and then started weaving in and out of the fir trees, looking for the perfect Christmas benefit centerpiece. There were a lot of beautiful trees out here, of all shapes and sizes, but my heart was immediately set on one that grew near the tallest point on the hill. The tree was well-shaped, with a nice straight trunk and bushy branches. I could picture it in the banquet hall perfectly. "That's the one," I said, gesturing and then leading him up toward the tree. "You sure?" he asked, glancing over at me as I nodded, and then gazing up at it with a determined look on his face. "All right then." "You're certainly proving to be very outdoorsy," I said, planting my feet in the snow as I watched him prepare to chop the tree down. I didn't expect all this hiking and axe slinging from a restaurateur. "Glad I can surprise you," he said, catching my eye for a long look, before he lined up the axe with the tree trunk and practiced a few slow swings. "You may not know this, but I grew up in this town, Michele. My dad, may he rest in peace, used to take me fishing and foraging in the summertime, just for the fun of it." "Really?" I asked, feeling a little twinge to hear him talk about his father passing away. I knew that he'd inherited the restaurant from his dad, but seeing the emotion in his eyes as he shared about their good times together tugged at my heartstrings. Losing his dad must have been hard on him. "I'm sorry about your dad." "Thanks, Michele." He nodded, his expression lifting a little as if my words had comforted him. He glanced at the axe with a mischievous look. I was chopping firewood by the time I was 12, and I knew how to gut and fry a line-caught fish around the same time. "That's impressive," I said, enjoying the personal story he'd shared with me. "I'm from Cincinnati, originally. We don't really do the outdoorsy thing there. The city life never really left me, even though we moved here when I was a kid." "I can tell you're more indoorsy than outdoorsy," he said with a chuckle. "But you know what? Everyone is different. It's nice to be able to show you something new. Even better since you're such a good sport at trying new things. You're really good company, Michele." Before I had time to process everything he had said, much less respond to it, Dylan reared back with the axe and slung it deep into the wood of the trunk. I let out a little gasp of surprise. The first blow didn't knock the tree down, though. Honestly, I wasn't sure if that was even possible to do, but after 3 or 4 more sturdy chops, the tree started to wobble. "Stand clear," Dylan said, giving me a quick look. "You don't have to tell me twice," I said, scurrying out of the way and pulling a little sled over behind him. 2 strikes later, the trunk cracked clean apart and the tree came down with an impressive thump, kicking up snow and shattered icicles. I let out a triumphant whoop, clapping my hands together. "You did it. Great job. Thanks for the kudos." Dylan grinned over his shoulder at me, and all the air left my potty in a whoosh. He really did have a fantastic smile. Maybe it was a good thing he didn't bust out that smile very often, because that megawatt grin was enough to knock me backwards a few paces. "Want to help me haul this bad boy onto a sled?" he asked, raising his eyebrows at me. "Or do they not do that in Cincinnati?" "Hey, I've been in Whitefish for quite some time now. I can be helpful." "Glad to hear it," he said with a nod. Working together, we thrust our gloved hands onto the tree and grasped it securely. Then we dragged it toward the sled. Dylan hefted up the heaviest part of the tree, leaving me holding the top. I grunted, barely able to get my end up off the ground. To my relief, Dylan didn't tease me or seem irritated. He just shouldered his extra burden with determination. Once the tree was strapped onto the sled, we both stood there in the snow, breathing heavily and smiling at each other. I had the strong urge to hug him, but I resisted, of course. "Not bad for a city slicker," he said, wrapping the reins of the sled around his hands. "Now, let's take it nice and slow down the hill, and go pay the good people who run this establishment. They'll get the tree loaded onto the truck, although you seem ready to tackle anything." "Thanks for your faith in me," I said, finding that I meant the words. He really did seem to have faith in me being a partner and helping out, even though I was a first-timer. I followed Dylan carefully down the least steep side of the hill, occasionally putting a hand out to steady the sled or correct its course. When we reached the bottom of the hill, he paid a young woman who was wearing a jingle bell hat with elf ears for the tree. Then, 2 college-aged looking guys wearing matching flannels helped Dylan get the giant tree into the back of his truck. Once it was safely tied down, Dylan gestured toward a little red shed decorated with holly where farm workers were selling hot drinks. "Can I buy you a hot cocoa, Michele? You just did all this work to help me get the perfect tree, and now you want to buy me a hot cocoa?" I said with a little laugh. "Don't you think I should be treating here?" "We did the work together," he said, his voice soft and endearing. "It most definitely wasn't all me. My treat, really." "In that case, I'd love one," I said, glad to stretch out our time together. Dylan and I strolled side by side to the Christmas Tree Farms shed where they were selling hot drinks. I'd had such a good time hiking and selecting the perfect tree with him. I didn't want our time together to end, even if it had been all for the charity dinner. I needed to keep reminding myself of that fact. A few minutes later, we exited the shed, sipping steaming cups of thick, sugary hot chocolate. I had to admit the sweet, warm liquid really hit the spot after all that hiking around. In fact, the taste was a perfect complement to the scent of fir sap lingering on my hands. Ah. We had started meandering toward the truck when I spotted Holly, who was scoping out the smaller trees with a very bundled-up baby Sophia cuddled against her chest in a baby carrier. "Holly!" I exclaimed, waving as she lifted her head and caught sight of me. Then her gaze moved to Dylan and her mouth twitched. She wore a delightfully inquisitive look as she approached us. "Hey, Michele. What a fun surprise running into you here," I said, giving her a one-armed hug so I wouldn't spill my cocoa or squish little Sophia. "Are you picking out a tree for your house?" "Getting a wreath for the front door, actually," she said, putting an arm around me and giving me a squeeze. "This farm has the best-smelling trees. I love it here." I stepped back, looking around. "Where's Dave?" "He's at home, looking after little Joe. Poor kid has the winter sniffles." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, making a frowny face. It's okay, just a mild case, she said, waving a hand in dismissal, as if she herself didn't want to worry about his little cold. We took him to the doctor and, okay, I may have called their office a few times since, but they reassured me that it's nothing serious. He just needs to stay snugly indoors, get his rest, and he'll be fine. Well, that's good, I said, feeling relieved. Sophia isn't sick, and she's quite the adventurer. Aren't you? She smiled down at her daughter, who cooed. Then she glanced at Dylan, who stood near us, and then gave me one of those wry, knowing smiles that told me she would be teasing me as soon as we were alone. Holly, you remember Dylan, right? I asked, knowing they had met a few times, including after Holly's wedding at Danica's. Dylan, you remember Holly? Yes, hello, he said, giving her a friendly nod. Of course, I remember you too, she said, giving him a friendly nod in return. It's good to see you again, Dylan. This is my daughter, Sophia. Hello, Sophia, he said, using the cutest voice as he crouched down to give her a little wave. The gesture was so adorable that it made my heart melt. Holly gave me a look and mouthed, so sweet, before turning back to Dylan. It's a surprise seeing the two of you out here together. Are you picking out a tree for business or for pleasure? It's for work, I said, my cheeks immediately heating. She was clearly teasing me a little bit, since she knew about my tiny but long-standing crush on Dylan. She would hear it from me later, for sure. For work, huh? She said, in a tone that indicated she felt there was more to it than just work. We are technically here on benefit business, Dylan said, not looking the slightest bit uncomfortable at her inferring that we might be here for personal reasons. It wouldn't be a Christmas party without a big fir tree to put all of the presents under. Michele wanted to find the best tree in the forest, and she did. Sounds like you two really have the Christmas spirit, Holly said, waggling her eyebrows at me. Holly, let me get you an apple cider, I blurted, desperate for any excuse to get out of this conversation before she embarrassed me further. Dylan, is it all right if I meet you back at the truck in a few minutes? Sounds good to me, he said, lifting his cup in salute. Nice to see you, Holly. And Sophia. You too, Dylan, Holly said, giving him a warm smile. As soon as he was out of earshot, I leaned into Holly and whispered, What do you think you're doing? I told you, shopping for a wreath, she said with that same teasing tone. Holly? I leaned back on my heels and fixed her with my best get real look. Okay, she said, raising her palms and giggling. I was having a little fun with you. But you two looked so sweet walking together, almost like a first date. Now you know it wasn't a date, I said with a little sigh. Still, a romantic outing with Dylan at the Christmas tree farm? She raised her eyebrows and blinked at me. That's your dream come true. You must be enjoying it. Not so loud, I said, glancing over my shoulder to where Dylan was hanging around his truck, scrolling on his phone. Then I turned back to Holly, unable to help the smile that crept across my face. But yeah, we had a really good time. Did you invite him tree shopping, or did he invite you? He offered to help me, and I took him up on it, of course. And he bought me cocoa, I said, hefting my cup high. What do you think that means? That sounds like a date, Michele. It's not a date though, I said, biting my lip and wishing I were wrong. I mean, we are here for the benefit dinner. He said so himself. Yeah, but the look on both of your faces when I saw you said otherwise, she said, bouncing up and down slightly to keep Sophia from getting fussy. The two of you seemed like it was more than just business. You think so? I know so. Does it feel date-ish to you? Yeah, I admitted, my tummy doing a little flip. We never did anything outside of work before he asked me to take over the event planning. And we have the best time together, and sometimes I catch him looking at me. But I must be imagining things. He's my boss. It's so confusing. I had to keep reminding myself to not make it weird. But we had such a nice time together. Like a really nice time. Sounds like that's your answer. The tree is for the benefit dinner though, Holly, I said, taking a pensive sip of my hot chocolate before reaching out to let tiny Sophia grasp one of my fingers with her pudgy baby hand. It's not like we were buying a tree for personal reasons. All I'm saying is that you should explore the possibility, Holly said. I know you've had a thing for Dylan for a long time. Yeah, but he's my boss, I said, knowing that even thinking about the possibility of dating Dylan was just dreaming. You and Dylan met at the restaurant, so what? If you guys need to change up the hierarchy at work to make it less of a conflict of interest, so be it. Cross that bridge when you come to it, sweetie. I guess you're right, I said, wondering if my crush could actually turn into something more. I glanced at the truck, watching him tap into his phone as he waited patiently for me. I'm always right, Holly said proudly. That's the mom rule. Speaking of moms, I said, swiveling the conversation around to Holly instead of me. How are things going with Dave's parents? I know you were nervous about spending the holidays with them for the first time. The planning part is going okay, she said, bouncing Sophia a little faster. I'm just a ball of anxiety, though. Dave comes from this big, tight-knit family. What if they don't like spending time with me? That would never happen, I said, placing a hand on her shoulder. They're going to love you. It's impossible not to love you. Dave certainly does. Thanks, Michele, she said, letting out a long sigh. I can always count on you to talk me away from the edge. I shrugged. That's my job. Those are best friend rules. You're the best, she said. I winked at her, right back at ya. You'd better get over to the truck. Dylan is looking a little lonely, she said, giving me a friendly nudge. Okay, talk to you later, I said, and then made my way over to Dylan, the snow crunching beneath my feet. At the sound, he glanced up from his phone and his eyes brightened. I hadn't seen him look this happy in a long time. Not since before that nasty breakup he had a few years back. Was I the reason for that sparkle? I was surprised to discover how much I wanted to be the reason. Ready? I asked a little breathlessly. I'm ready, he said, opening the door to the truck for me. Let's hit the road. Let's hit the road, I repeated, thinking that opening the door for me was definitely a date-ish thing to do. Chapter 5. Dylan and I arrived at the Hawthorne Hotel on Main Street and roped 2 of the hotel's staff members into helping us carry the tree inside, from the truck to the banquet hall. They helped us erect our beautiful tree in the Christmas tree stand near the window of the hall. It filled the space perfectly and practically begged to be trimmed with tinsel and lights. We appreciate your help, Dylan said, waving to our 2 helpers who headed back to work. Then he turned to me. What do you think? I've got to hand it to you, Dylan, I said, wiping the pine needles off my hands. You were right about us getting a live tree. This is seriously the prettiest tree of the season. Told you we'd find it, he said, then gestured to the boxes of decorations sitting in the corner. Should we get started decorating the tree? My belly unwittingly did a flip. Would I love to decorate the tree with Dylan? Yes, of course. But I was doing a job and should try to be professional. Right? You don't have to help with the decorations, I said, holding up my hands and giving him an appreciative smile. I've got it covered. It's my job anyway. You've already done so much. I'm sure you want to head home. I mean, I don't want to take up too much of your weekend. Okay, I was nervous and babbling. I closed my mouth to stop talking. I don't mind helping out, he said, hefting up one of the ornament boxes and carrying it over to the tree. And between you and me, I don't really have anything else going on this weekend. Decorating the tree with you would be way more fun than sitting around watching reruns or cleaning my kitchen. A smile immediately spread across my face. Be careful, it might get back to the staff that you're doing something just for the fun of it, I joked. I've heard about my reputation as a stick in the mud, he said, giving a shrug, before popping open the lid of the ornament box. Then he sighed. But I'm only that way because somebody has to be responsible for everything. And as the owner, that person is me. I was just teasing and I get it, I said, reaching down to pull out gleaming glass orbs and sculpted golden icicles. You're in charge of a lot of moving parts and a lot of people. You do a great job at it too. But I'm glad you're letting yourself have some fun. The corners of his mouth lifted. Having fun isn't hard when I'm with you. I glanced up at him in surprise, noticing the smile that reached his eyes. A second later, his expression tightened and he blinked. Fun is kind of the definition of your event planning job, right? He said quickly, waving an ornament so quickly I thought maybe it would fall. Making sure people are having a good time? Your positive attitude is infectious, Michele. It's also why you're a good server. Wait, was he babbling and nervous now? Interesting. Thanks, I said, my heart racing as I pushed up on my tiptoes to hang the ornaments from one of the sturdiest-looking boughs. I wasn't sure what else to say. I was afraid that if I said anything else, then I would end up saying too much and putting my foot in my mouth. Feelings were tricky things. They made you say foolish things if you weren't careful. And we were here for work, not a date. Although the more time I spent with him, the more I wished otherwise. Better to keep quiet and focus on the task at hand. Dylan stooped down and picked up a handful of ornaments, then began helping me trim the tree we had chosen together. He was a little taller than me, so he was able to reach the higher branches. Once we had filled up the tree as much as we could, Dylan disappeared somewhere into the hotel and returned with a step stool so we could reach the higher branches. We worked in companionable silence, listening to the Christmas carols coming from a nearby speaker, sometimes commenting on the ornaments or the wailing of the winter wind outside, but mostly I just enjoyed the scent of the tree and the feel of glass under my fingers and the simplicity of his company. Being with Dylan was easy, which could be dangerous with him being my boss. Spending time with him was beyond nice. I couldn't help imagining a future Christmas with Dylan, one where we might be in a cozy little house together, trimming a smaller tree that we had picked out just for ourselves. He would smile at me and then lean toward me with those irresistible lips. I caught myself and shook my head, trying to knock a little sense into my brain. What was I thinking? I had known Dylan for years, and nothing romantic had ever blossomed between us. Why did I think this year would be any different? Moreover, I didn't even know if he had feelings for me or not, even though I had to admit he'd been acting extra attentive and a little strange over the last couple of weeks. But maybe he was just helping out because he wanted to be charitable. Maybe it was just good old-fashioned Christmas cheer motivating him, not hidden feelings for me. It's been ages since I decorated a tree, he said, pulling me out of my thoughts. Really? I asked, stepping up onto the stool so I could hang a crystal snowflake from one of the tippy-top boughs. Long time, huh? Dylan didn't share much about his personal life. I knew he was single, but that he had been in a serious long-term relationship with a woman I had never met. That was all I'd ever discovered about his dating history, though. Yeah, long time, he said, gazing up at the tree with a strange, thoughtful expression on his face. Not since I split with my ex. His ex? Gulp. No tree since then. My voice trailed off. I didn't want to put him on the spot, but I hoped he'd share more. As if reading my mind, he said, I don't have any family around, and it just seems like a lot of work and heartache to put up a tree just for my sake. You actually don't put up a Christmas tree in your house because it would only be for you? I asked, taken aback. That's top-tier Grinch behavior, I joked. But then again, I guess he had his reasons. I didn't used to be a Grinch, he said, seeming to take my teasing tone seriously. It's been 2 Christmases now that I haven't decorated a tree. This is nice. I guess I forgot how much fun it is to arrange all the ornaments just right. Maybe I've been missing out. I always have a tree at my place, I said, grunting as I pushed up onto my tiptoes on the step stool. Here, let me spot you, he said, hurrying over. Thanks, I said, balancing a big stained glass star in my hands. He came up behind me and put his hands on my waist, steadying me so I could reach the top of the tree. My skin warmed under his secure, steadying touch, and I swallowed through my suddenly dry throat. Got it? He asked softly just as I placed the star on the tree. Yep, I said, trying to keep my voice light so he wouldn't know how his touch affected me. Was it hot in here? He let go of my waist and held a hand out to me. Pressing my lips together, I put my hand in his, the warm feel of his skin sending tingles skittering up my arm as he helped me off the step stool. My feet hit solid ground, and we stood in front of the tree for a long, electric moment, just holding hands and staring at each other. Then he seemed to realize what we were doing, because he quickly released my hand. What caused it? I asked, carefully. He lifted his head and met my gaze. Caused it. My cheeks heated as I realized he might have thought I'd meant taking my hand. The breakup with your ex? I said, thinking I might be overstepping and that maybe going down this road of conversation with Dylan was a bad idea, but I was on it now. He took a deep breath, stuffing his hands in the front pockets of his jeans. For a moment, I thought he was going to tell me to back off and to keep things professional. But then he let out a long sigh and met my eyes. We had known each other in high school and started dating right after graduation, he said, his face even more serious than usual. I thought we'd last forever, but the longer we stayed together, the more we grew apart. My nose wrinkled and my lips twisted to the side. I'm sure that was hard. He nodded. Maybe we didn't even have enough in common in the beginning, now that I look back. Anyway, just about the time I was wondering if we should end things, she came to me and told me she was in love with someone else. She said he was some anesthesiologist who lived across the country. They met online. Oof, I said, gently touching him on the elbow. He glanced down at the point of contact, but he didn't pull away. I'm sorry. That's rough. It's okay, he said with a shrug. After the initial hurt and shock settled in, we talked it through and realized we were better off apart. She and the anesthesiologist got married, and now they live in San Diego. And me? Well, I have the restaurant. It's okay to want more than the restaurant, I blurted. A moment later, my eyes widened. I probably should have kept that part to myself, but he'd opened up to me on a personal level, and it made me feel like I could be honest with him. It's okay to want to find love or start a family. Is that what you want? He asked. Hey, we aren't talking about me, I said, trying to lay on the humor to keep us from getting too serious too quickly. We were talking about you. All right. But if I open up to you, then it's only fair that you share with me. Deal? He held out his pinky finger to me, as if we were two kids on the playground. It was an endearing gesture that I wouldn't have expected from my buttoned-up boss. But it seemed like we were getting past the professional-only relationship and moving into a more companionable space. Deal, I said, hooking my pinky finger around his and giving it a shake. He nodded once, like we had just made a legally binding pact. I do want a future with someone, he said, hooking his thumbs on the belt loops of his jeans. Maybe it's foolish of me after such a failed relationship that I thought would last, but lately I've been thinking I do want another shot at happiness. Everyone deserves that, I said logically. Life doesn't need to only be about work. I spend so much time at work because I love the restaurant and the people who work for me. But if I'm being honest, it also makes it easier to keep my head down and ignore my personal life. But that doesn't mean I don't want to find love again. I stood in stunned silence for a moment. That was as vulnerable as Dylan had ever been with me or anyone else at work. I'd spent many hours chatting in the back of the restaurant or gossiping on my break, but whenever Dylan joined in the conversations, it had always been surface-level talk. I felt like I was finally seeing underneath his straight-laced facade to the real man underneath, someone who was carrying around a wounded heart and yet still made room for hope despite it all. It tugged at my heartstrings. "A deal's a deal, Michele," he said, turning to face me. "What about you?" "Me?" I asked, swallowing hard. I knew I had agreed to swap stories, but now that it was my turn, I felt shy. "Tell me honestly. Are you the settling down type?" he said, with a genuine curiosity in his eyes that threw me for a loop. "Or would you prefer to go through life solo?" I didn't have to think about my answer. I've been solo for quite a while. Maybe longer than I actually realized. "But yes, I'm hoping to start my own family one day," I said, biting my bottom lip. "I'm just not sure when that will be or what it will look like. To tell you the truth, I haven't had very good luck with family up until this point." "What do you mean?" Dylan asked. If it were anyone else, I might find a way to wiggle out of the question. But he'd opened up to me and his eyes were velvety soft, and his voice was so soothing. Also, I had pinky promised after all. But mostly, I felt safe with Dylan. Safer than I'd felt in a long time, or maybe ever. "I never knew my dad," I said, the truth pouring out of me and leaving me feeling exposed. "My mom raised me all by herself. And for a long time, we were very close. She worked as a school teacher. She supported my childhood dreams," I said, thinking about all of the tea parties she'd attended that I'd thrown with my stuffed animals, and was there for me through all my teenage angst and early adulthood searching and mistakes. She was more than a mom, she was a best friend. "Then what happened?" Dylan asked, picking up another box of ornaments. He handed me a glass orb, which I took gratefully. It made it easier to talk, somehow, when we were doing an unrelated activity together. "We had a fight last Christmas," I said tightly, my cheeks heating. I felt so ashamed for my role in our argument, for the unkind things I had said, and the harsh tone I had taken with her. It was one of those fights that started about something small, but was really about underlying issues that had been boiling up for years. She was worried I wasn't taking my life seriously enough, and said as much. "Ouch," he said. I nodded, remembering how defensive I'd felt at that accusation, how much it had hurt me to my core. I insisted that I was fine. I told her she was meddling and needed to focus more on her own happiness. It got ugly. We stopped talking after that. "You stopped talking altogether?" he said, raising his eyebrows. But he didn't seem like he was judging me, he just seemed like he was concerned. "Mostly, yeah. She sent me a birthday card last year, and we've exchanged a couple of texts checking up on each other, but that's all," I said, my throat tightening as I placed an ornament on the tree. "It's been hard without her, but I wouldn't even know how to start talking again. Sometimes I think of reaching out, but then I wonder, what if she's still mad at me? I'm sure our relationship could never be like it was before the fight. I'm not sure we could ever get that back," I said, my vision suddenly blurred. "I wouldn't put any sort of miracle past the Christmas season," he said quietly. "After all, I haven't decorated a tree in years, but here I am." I smiled at his small point. "True. Maybe it's time to reach out and extend the olive branch," he said, his tone calm and caring. "Maybe you're right," I said, taking in a long breath and trying to process how I could take the first step. "I don't know, Dylan. After something this big, it's just so hard to reach out over the phone. It seems so impersonal." "I understand," he said. "I wish she was here so we could get coffee and talk the whole thing through," I said honestly. I let out a little laugh to keep the tears at bay, but I didn't do a very good job because my eyes were now burning. If I could have one thing for Christmas, it would be to have that relationship with my mom back. Ever the man of few words, Dylan didn't say anything. Instead, he stepped forward and gently slipped his arms around me. My breath caught in surprise, but a rush of warmth came over me that made something click in place, and I melted into him. A feeling of peace settled over me as I breathed in the scent of his cedar aftershave and felt the warmth radiating off his body. He was solid and real, holding me like I was precious and deserved to be comforted. The gesture felt overwhelming, and a tear slipped down my cheek. Michele. His voice was soft, and he stepped back a little. He reached up to wipe my tear away with his thumb. His hand lingered on my face, the pads of his fingers gentle against my skin, and that broke me. All rational thought fizzled out of my head, and I leaned forward and pressed my mouth to his lips. At first he froze, and I felt terrified I'd crossed some sort of boundary that shouldn't have been crossed, but a moment later his shoulders relaxed, and he cupped my face in his palms. Then he kissed me back, slow and sweet, and electricity ran from the crown of my head to the tips of my fingers and toes. Oh wow! I dreamed about this moment many times. Now the dream had become real, and this kiss had totally surpassed my imaginary hype. My heart filled as I lost myself in the feel of his mouth against mine, searching and exploring, in his woodsy, clean smell, and in the weight of my hands on his shoulders. All too quickly, he pulled away. "I'm sorry, Michele," he said, and my heart sank. To his credit, he really did sound sorry. "I didn't mean for that to happen." "Well, maybe I did, I don't know, but I haven't thought this through enough. I'm not sure if this is too much right now." "I'm too much for you?" I asked, my heart twisting. No, he said quickly, reaching for my hand. "Not you. You're amazing. You're one of the most remarkable people I've ever met." My eyebrows came together. "And that's a problem." He let out a long sigh. "I need to think. After all, there are a lot of complicating factors here. You work for me. I can't jump in without considering all of the ramifications." And just like that, the closed-off Dylan was back. "I see," I said, pressing my lips together, the taste of him still fresh to my senses. "Please don't be upset with me." "I'm too much," I repeated, trying to understand his need to be so rational. "What about following your heart?" "Michele, you're wonderful. I'm just not interested," I said, the realization sinking in. I stepped back and waved my hands. "I get it, no problem. I'm sorry for kissing you when I obviously shouldn't have." "I didn't say I wasn't interested," he said, his facial muscles tense and his amber gaze serious. "This feels like something real, Michele. If we do this, we need to do it right." I tilted my head. "Do it right? Let's take some time to process," he said. "Process what?" I said, my head spinning. His lips had told me he had feelings for me, but his words were saying something else. I felt so confused. "What do you need to think about?" He took a step toward me and lifted my hand. "How to ask you on a date. A real date, not a work thing. I just need to gather my thoughts first. Is that all right?" My heart skipped a beat. A real date? With Dylan? So, I hadn't imagined that he liked me. Just in true Dylan fashion, he wanted to take things slow. This could be a good idea, even though I had the urge to jump in with both feet. "Not smart, Michele." "Taking some time sounds good to me," I said, since my head was swimming. What did Dylan consider as doing things right? What sort of date did he have in store for us? A look of relief swept across his face. "I'm glad to hear you say that." "I'm glad to hear we're going on a date," I said, feeling bold and honest. "Me too," he said with a secret smile before he handed me an ornament. "Shall we finish this up?" "Yes," I said, glad we were on the same page as I took the ornament from him. I hated to bring something like pragmatism into the mix during this delicate moment, but my mind was racing with questions. "Dylan, what happens if someone from Danica's sees us out on a date and starts asking questions?" "If people want to talk, let them," he said, his tone firm. "I'm not interested in keeping secrets." "I like that about you," I said, admiring his integrity. In the meantime, if it's all right with you, I'm going to assign you another direct supervisor at work to put a little more distance between us professionally. That way, no one can accuse us of playing favorites with each other." "Good idea," I said, feeling really glad that he was starting to think things through. Dylan and I were going on a date. I felt both nervous and excited at the same time. "And in the meantime, you'll think about things, like you said. Just give me a couple of days to get my head on straight and plan something wonderful," he said with that small smile that made my heart go pitter-patter. "For now, let's finish trimming this tree. There's a whole box of ribbon in there that needs to be unraveled, and putting ribbon on a tree is definitely a two-person job. Even though we won't have our official date yet, we can still enjoy spending time together." "I like the sound of that," I said, giving him a tentative smile back. Dylan was different than any guy I'd ever known. He was serious and liked to think about things, and he was honest and kind. Just like Christmas presents, some things were made all the sweeter by waiting for the perfect moment to dive in. "Can I just ask you one more question, Dylan?" I said, noticing the immediate worry come into his eyes before I gestured to the tree. "Would you take over step-stool duty for that ribbon? I'm not exactly a fan of heights." "Of course," he said as an expression of relief crossed his features before he laughed, the joy in his voice making my chest light and bubbly. And even though this was not a date, the rest of the afternoon was the best non-date I'd ever had in my life. So I couldn't wait to see what a real date with Dylan would be like. Chapter 6. Over the next few days, Dylan and I worked hard as per business as usual, and nothing had changed, with the exception of the occasional long glance exchanged, a secret smile here or there, and of course, the butterflies in my belly whenever we passed by each other. But we hadn't had time to talk or hang out or anything. We were slammed with holiday guests at Danica's, which kept me busy. In addition, I was tied up in planning and executing the charity event. Event planning had been all fun and games when it was just in my head, but once I started implementing the plans and making things happen in real life, things did not always go smoothly. Just like with a wedding, so much that could go wrong did go wrong. The tablecloths got sent to the wrong address, the chair rental company almost doubled the price they had quoted us, and the caterers informed us that they couldn't actually do roast duck due to a shortage, so we would have to settle for roast chicken instead. Most of these issues, except perhaps the fowl dilemma, were expensive, and I soon burned through most of the budget Dylan had allotted me. I refused to go over budget, so I ended up DIYing a lot of the work that was left, which was a lot of time-consuming work that I hadn't planned. I used a hot glue gun and some dollar store vases and dried flowers to create centerpieces that turned out even better than I expected, and gathered whatever boughs of holly and fir I was graciously allowed to forage from the Christmas tree farm instead of springing for pre-made wreaths. In the end, I squeaked by just under budget and felt very proud. I had the urge to share my success with my mom, but quickly pushed that thought out of my head. The next person I was bursting to tell, even before Holly, was Dylan. I was so excited that I practically ran over to his office at Danica's. I paused outside the door, taking a few deep breaths to calm my racing heart, when suddenly the door swung open. "Ah," I said, jumping back and waving my hands in the air. "Michele," Dylan said, obviously surprised to see me lurking outside his door. "Sorry, I didn't know you were here. Are you all right?" I put a hand to my heart. "Yes, I was just going to knock. I didn't mean to, lurk outside your door or anything." "No, it's fine," he said, reaching out and gently touching my shoulder. "It's good to see you." "You too," I said, glancing at the point of contact even as tingles spread along my shoulder and up my neck. He hadn't touched me since our kiss in the banquet hall, and the sparks were definitely still there. Gulp. "I wanted to talk to you about something. Do you have a minute?" Of course, I'd actually been meaning to talk to you too. Step inside, he said, leaving the door slightly ajar as he came in behind me. Now that we were inside, I felt a little silly about being so excited to tell him about the budget. I mean, it was part of the job after all. I licked my bottom lip. I just wanted to let you know in person that everything is in order with the benefit dinner, and we came in just under budget, I said, lifting my lashes to look into those eyes of his. That's fantastic, Michele, he said, his eyes lighting up. It seemed like we were going to go over with those last-minute increases. I was able to move some funds from table decorations by doing a little arts and crafts in my spare time, I said, thinking of how late I'd had to stay up to finish them. You're incredible, he said, looking impressed. Thanks, I said, feeling proud of myself as well, but appreciating his praise. Now, what did you want to talk to me about? I asked, wondering if he had to add something else to the benefit dinner. If so, we were almost out of time, but I'd have to find a way to make it work. It's about us, he said, making my throat go dry. Okay. My throat went dry. Oh no. Had he changed his mind? I knew Dylan and I had been too good to be true. It was never a good idea to date your boss. I should have just restrained my emotions, not kissed him, and I meant what I said about wanting to take you out on a real date, he said, his expression serious. You did, I said dumbly, my mouth falling open a little. Giving into feelings was a seriously wild roller coaster for the emotions. Pretty sure I just got whiplash. You know the holiday market in the town square that happens every weekend? You're so creative, I thought that might be something you'd enjoy. I'd love to take you this Saturday as our first official date, if you'd like. That sounds amazing, I said, letting out a sigh of relief as my stomach started to bubble with excitement. Dylan still wanted to take me out. He wanted to be seen with me in public, and he wanted to do something that would make me happy. Needless to say, a holiday market was exactly the thing to bring a smile to my face. I'd love to go to the market with you. I'm glad to hear it, he said, looking just as relieved as I felt. It let me know that this date was important to him and that he'd put a lot of thought into it, which was so sweet. Does it work if I pick you up from your place at 5? It's so festive with all of the Christmas lights once the sun goes down. Sounds perfect, I said, resisting the alarmingly strong urge I had to kiss him on the cheek right there in the middle of our workplace. I'm looking forward to it, Dylan. Then I smiled and slipped out of his office, a huge smile spread across my face. My first official date with Dylan. I couldn't wait. Even though Dylan had seen me in various outfits for many years, getting dressed tonight felt totally different. This time it would be personal, as it would be our first date. Therefore, I spent an hour agonizing over what to wear on our date to the holiday market because I wanted to be cute, but comfortable, memorable, but also warm. Decisions. In the end, I decided on wearing a cable-knit sweater, a cozy cotton skirt over warm leggings, and my favorite knee-high leather boots. The ensemble was chic but ready for anything, from a snowstorm to a truck ride to a winter market. Perfect. Dylan arrived just before 5, punctual as ever, and I was so excited that I went outside to greet him. He got out of his truck and came around to meet me, wearing an almost shy smile. He opened his arms and gave me a sweet hug. I let out a happy little sigh as I leaned against him, wrapped snugly in his arms, and a feeling of warmth enveloped me like a favorite blanket. I inhaled his scent, which was fresh and outdoorsy, making me think of long hikes on trails that I'd love to do with him. You look beautiful, he said, leaning back a little and peering down at me. The way his eyes shined at me made all the waiting, all the questions about what was going on between us worth it. A man didn't look at a woman like that unless he had every intention of sharing a beautiful evening with her. Ready to get going? He asked. Let's hit the road, I said, stepping back from him and stamping my feet to ward off the cold. I hope that truck is heated. You'll be cozy as a bug in a rug, I promise, he said, opening the passenger door for me and closing it once I'd hopped in. He moved around to the driver's side door, hopped inside, then he kicked the heat up high and turned both vents on me. Ever the gentleman. "Thank you," I said, rubbing my hands together. The drive to the town square was short but sweet, especially because Dylan held my hand for the entire duration of our trip. He parked and then released my hand, only to hold it again once we started a leisurely stroll towards the brightly lit square, which was crammed with booths and vendor tables. I was warm to the touch despite the biting wind, my heart pounding fast and strong in my chest. I was out on a real date with Dylan, and holding hands felt new and exciting, but also familiar and natural, as if like we'd been holding hands like this for years. He seemed relaxed, like he didn't care who saw us, which made me feel special, like this thing between us was real. "Let me know if you see anything special you like," he said, leaning down so he could be heard over the chattering crowd and festive music coming from various speakers. It felt like half the town was out here tonight, hurrying to finish their last-minute Christmas shopping. "I'd like to get you a little memento of our date if you'll let me." "That's very thoughtful," I said, thinking that my opinion of him being considerate had just kicked up a notch. "But only if you'll let me get you a little something in return." He gave me a side glance, as if I'd surprised him. "I like that idea, Michele. Look over there." "What?" I asked, turning in the direction that he gestured at with his hand. "Hot wine and spiced cider," he said, squeezing my hand. "Care for something warm to drink?" "In this weather?" "Always." Dylan bought us 2 steaming mugs of spiced wine, which was perfectly sweet and mulled to perfection. I tasted orange, anise, and cinnamon with every sip. Then we began at one end of the market and slowly started to make our way to the other end, stopping at every booth to say hello to the proprietors and browse the various items. There were folks selling wooden toys and embroidered dish towels and chocolate bars and hand-poured candles, not to mention carved cutting boards, handmade jewelry, and stitched dolls with yarn for hair. "Oh, she's so cute," I said, making a fuss over a doll with curly black hair that was wearing a pale lilac dress. Her tiny little shoes were secured to her feet with shiny buttons. This would be the perfect gift for a little girl. It's the kind of special treasure you could keep for years and hand down to the next generation. "Is there a special little girl in your life?" Dylan asked as I admired the doll. "I've never heard you mention any kids." "I don't have kids," I said, smiling down at the doll as I smoothed her hair back. "But I'd like to have them someday. 1 boy and 1 girl, the perfect balance." "Funny," Dylan said with a lopsided smile. "That's what I always said, too." "Do you have any children?" I asked, careful not to overstep myself too much. He had never mentioned children, but it was possible he had become a father with a previous partner and never mentioned it, I supposed. "Me? No, never. But like you said, maybe someday." "You know," I said, a beautiful little person coming to mind. "Now that I think of it, there is a special little girl in my life, Sophia, Holly's daughter." "Of course," he said, recognition lighting up his eyes. "The cute little baby Holly and Dave bring into Danica's. We saw her at the Christmas tree farm, too. What's her brother's name again? Was it Little Joe?" "Exactly right," I said, impressed at his memory. "This is the perfect Christmas present for Sophia. I already got Joe a wooden train with spinning wheels, so he's all set. Sophia is going to love this, I know it." I paid the vendor, who lovingly wrapped the doll up in paper as brown and wrinkled as the gentleman's hands. Once the doll was safely tucked away in my purse, we continued our journey through the labyrinth of stalls. We stopped at a booth selling traditional hand-painted glass ornaments. They were all displayed on artificial trees set up in drifts of spun cotton snow, and the interior of the booth was strung with icicle lights to make it all the more magical. "Wow," I said, breathing in the magic of the booth. "Hello," a cheery, bouncy, college-aged young woman behind the counter said. Her dark curls bounced around her head, and she wore a Santa's Biggest Fan Christmas sweater. "Can I help you find anything?" We're just browsing, Dylan said. But thank you. I took a few minutes to admire the ornaments hanging from the tree. There were classical ornaments like jolly laughing Santa heads, miniature sleighs, displays of milk and cookies and reindeer, but there were also quirky modern ornaments, like Chinese takeout boxes, labradoodles, bottles of hairspray, and sparkling suns and moons. I've never seen this shop in town, I said, turning toward the young woman behind the counter. Are you a local? Nope, she said, lifting her chin proudly. We're a traveling pop-up based out of Christmas Mountain, Montana. Ever been there? My eyes squinted. I've heard of it. It's a couple hours from here, just a small town in the mountains dedicated to Christmas all year round, she said, her voice wistful. We've got an amazing Santa's village and lots of fun attractions. I grew up there. My dad owns this business and paints all the ornaments. I travel around during the winter months and sell them at craft fairs like this. But I'm always home in time for Christmas. Can't miss that. I was immediately charmed by this young woman. I'm Michele. What's your name? I'm Stephanie, she said with an enthusiastic smile. She was petite and had rosy cheeks, and she certainly looked the part of Santa's helper. She was as cheery as a North Pole elf. Hi, Stephanie, I said, shaking her hand and smiling back at her. It's nice to meet you. This is this is Dylan. Nice to meet you, Dylan said, politely stepping forward and shaking her hand as well. Then he turned back to the trees, studying the ornaments with laser focus. Browse as long as you want and let me know if I can help you with anything, she said, before turning her attention to another customer. What did you find? I asked, moving to stand at Dylan's side. Instinctively, I put my hand on his shoulder, and he shifted closer to my touch. It was amazing that this was only our first date. To me, we felt so much like a real normal couple already. Isn't this charming? He said, showing me a glass ornament with a village scene inside. It's so detailed, I said, leaning toward the little globe and touching the center of it with my finger. Look, it's a tiny town square, various little shops along Main Street, and a city hall. Indeed. Dylan gave the orb a shake, and tiny paper snowflakes scattered around the scene. A snow globe ornament, I said, squealing with glee. Oh my goodness, it's adorable. I love it. That's one of our best sellers, Stephanie said from behind us. It's a miniature version of Christmas Mountain. We sell out of them every year. Well, then we'd better get this one before you sell out, I said, taking the ornament out of Dylan's hands. For you, I said. He picked up a matching ornament from the tree, turning it over in his fingers. You really seem to like it, so I'm getting you one too. I chuckled to myself as we paid for our separate ornaments, let Stephanie wrap them up in crisp white paper, then stood in the snow outside the booth and exchanged our ornaments. Merry Christmas to you, Michele, Dylan said, taking the ornament I had bought him and cradling it in his hands. Merry Christmas right back at ya, I said, tucking my ornament in my purse. I guess now you'll have to decorate a tree at your place, huh? He lifted an eyebrow. Isn't it a little late in the season for that? It's not Christmas yet, is it? It's never too late for some holiday cheer. Okay then, he said, nodding as though he had made up his mind. I'll do it. I'll get a tree, and I'll haul the boxes of ornaments out of the basement, and I'll make sure this beautiful ornament has a place of honor front and center. I'm proud of you, Dylan, I said, touching his forearm. Starting over is always a little scary. It's easier when I have someone like you in my corner, cheering me on, he said, his voice deep and sincere. I edged a little closer to Dylan, aching to be warm in his arms. A light snow had started to fall, and it was the perfect weather to cuddle up together. Does that mean you'll invite me over to see your tree? I asked breathlessly. It was such a silly question, but I didn't know how else to phrase that I wanted us to be in each other's lives. And I had to know what he was thinking. I couldn't keep guessing. I like you an awful lot, Michele, he said, tucking a piece of my hair behind my ear. "I'd love for you to come over and help me decorate my tree, if it wouldn't be too much trouble." "I'd love to help you," I said, butterflies fluttering in my belly. "We already know that we can decorate a tree well together." "That's true," he said, chuckling a little before his facial expression sobered. "Now, I have a very serious question to ask you." "Yes?" I said, my eyes widening. "Would it be all right if I kissed you?" "I thought you would never ask," I said, holding my breath. Ever so slowly, Dylan leaned down and pressed his lips to mine as tiny snowflakes fell against my cheeks. His mouth captured mine as if he were sure about what he was doing and what he wanted, and I knew this was a kiss that would rival all other kisses for the rest of my life. He kissed me sweet and tender, but also deeply and passionately. A little sound of pleasure escaped me as he caressed my cheek and kept kissing me. Everything was perfect, from the snow settling in our hair and eyelashes, to the crowd milling around us, to the festive sound of piped-in Christmas carols and church bells echoing through the air. Finally, we pulled away, and he dropped his forehead to mine. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Another question?" I said in a teasing tone. "It's an important one," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded, my forehead moving against his. "Then go ahead. Ask me." "Would you have any interest in being my girlfriend?" he said, his eyes soft and vulnerable as he looked at me. "The hours are sporadic, but the dates will be good, and every time we're together feels like the best time I've ever had. I think we're a perfect fit, to be honest, and—" "Yes," I said, cutting him off and giving him a firm kiss to seal the deal before I threw my arms around his neck. "Yes?" "Really?" he said, like he couldn't believe his luck. Then he slipped his arms around my waist and held me securely against him like I was very precious to him. We hugged tightly, making me feel lost in our own little world, almost oblivious to the crowd around us. "I've been waiting for you to ask me that for a long time," I said, admitting that little secret and grinning up at him. "So that is really a yes?" he asked, still looking a little nervous. "It's definitely a yes. If you only knew how long I've had a crush on you." "You've had a crush on me?" he asked, his eyebrows shooting upward. "Now that's hot gossip. For how long? Come on, tell me." No, I said, giggling and waving my hands. "It's too embarrassing." "Well, lucky for you, I'm a very patient man. I'll get it out of you eventually." "I'm sure you will," I said, feeling like the happiest woman in the world. We spent the rest of the evening walking through the market arm in arm, talking about everything and nothing. At the end of the night, Dylan dropped me off at home. He walked me to the door and kissed me so soundly that I saw tiny falling snowflakes when I closed my eyes to go to sleep that night, just like in the snow globe ornament my boyfriend had given me. Chapter 7. Any spare time I had after work and event planning, I spent with Dylan, and we continued to grow closer. We spent our time driving around to look at Christmas lights, taking strolls through downtown, and even cooking dinner at each other's houses. Lots of people saw us and some people talked, which happened in a small town. But I didn't care. Dylan was who I cared about, and I felt immensely grateful that we had found each other. That didn't mean there weren't challenges, though. Being the girlfriend of a busy restaurant owner wasn't easy, due to Dylan's hectic and demanding schedule. I was super busy, and his time didn't open up just because he was doing everything in his power to spend time with me. But we'd been making it work, and being with Dylan felt like a little missing piece in my life had finally clicked into place. I never knew a relationship could be this easy. Happy sigh. Suddenly, it was the day before the Christmas Eve benefit dinner. By the evening, I felt stressed and worn thin from planning the event. Dylan had been slammed with work, which was, unfortunately, the reason his phone was ringing in the middle of our private romantic dinner. I had gone out of my way to make steak and bake sweet potatoes for us, but 10 minutes into the meal, he ended up on the phone with the hostess at Danica's, who was near tears because of all the things going wrong at the restaurant. "I'm sorry, it's just one of those days," Dylan said, leaning down to give me a quick kiss. "I've got to run and handle this." "But you just got here," I said, the hurt evident in my voice and my head feeling fuzzy with frustration. This was finally our time together, the thing I'd been looking forward to all week, and now he was leaving? I didn't know how to repress the disappointment in my tone. More importantly, though, I didn't want to fake being okay with him leaving. He had always told me to be honest with him, so I was being honest with him now, and I was upset. "I know, but there's an emergency over at Danica's." "It seems like there's always an emergency at Danica's," I said, tossing down my napkin. "And it seems like you always have to be the one to fix it." "It's my restaurant," he said with a sigh as he pulled on his coat. He was really going to leave me here alone with 2 uneaten steaks and an oven full of sweet potatoes. I could hardly believe it. I'm responsible for everything that goes on there. When my employee calls and needs help, it's my responsibility to go in and fix the problems. "Only because you won't share the responsibility with anybody else," I said, my forehead wrinkling as I crossed my arms. "There are plenty of capable people you could train to take some of the responsibilities off your shoulders, so you could spend more time outside of the restaurant. More time finishing a meal that your girlfriend worked hard to prepare for you." "I appreciate your efforts, Michele," he said flatly. "But please understand that staying here is just not realistic tonight." My temper flared. "The realistic thing I'm supposed to accept is you running off and ditching me?" "That's not what I meant, and you know it," he said, sounding weary. I thought about pushing further and expressing my irritation even more, just like what happened in that argument my mother and I had last year. But I had spent the last 12 months regretting the escalation of our disagreement, so I swallowed down my hurt and frustration. I thought I was a pretty kind and loving partner, but I could let my emotions run away with me sometimes. I knew that. When I got hurt and mad, I said things I didn't mean and always wished I could take back. So instead of starting a fight, I just waved Dylan away. "Go ahead and get to Danica's then, Dylan," I said, brushing my fingers in his direction. "I'll wrap up your dinner in case you want it later. But I'm not going to stay up waiting around for you to get done. I probably won't be awake that long, so I guess I'll just see you tomorrow." "Yeah, okay," he said, and there was real hurt in his tone and in his eyes. Oh no. What had I done? "I guess I'll see you then. Take care, Michele." And with that, he slipped out the door. My stomach tightened and tears formed in my eyes. He hadn't even let me kiss him goodbye or given me time to rethink my position and apologize. I'd been hurt that he was choosing work over me, but now I just felt upset with myself. Even though I'd tried to tamp down my emotions, I had let my frustrations get the best of me once again. This time, I'd hurt Dylan, the person I cared about so much. I wished I could smooth things over tonight, but he had to deal with whatever mini crisis was going on at Danica's. Plus, I hadn't been lying about being asleep by the time he was done. Every time there was an issue with the restaurant, he ended up staying way past closing, and I needed to get my rest to be ready for the big benefit dinner tomorrow. With soft holiday music playing in the background, I sat there all alone, eating a few bites of potato and steak. Finally, I decided I was too bummed out to eat and packaged up the leftovers to store in the fridge. I watched half of The Grinch on TV before realizing I was identifying too much with the Grinch. Obviously, I wasn't in any kind of festive mood, so I flipped off the TV, changed into my pajamas, and dropped into a fitful, dreamless sleep. I woke up in a grouchy mood the next day, but was so pumped full of adrenaline for the benefit dinner that I managed to get through all the tasks on my to-do list without much of a hitch. By the evening, the banquet hall was totally decorated, The chairs and tables were perfectly set up, and the dance floor in the center of the room was clear, just in case anyone got into the swinging spirit and wanted to boogie their way into the new year. I had to admit that the banquet hall looked more amazing than any of the previous years. The room had been absolutely transformed into an elegant Christmas wonderland, but there still seemed to be something missing. Namely, my heart. Dylan hadn't texted me all day, hopefully because he was slammed at Danica's, but I also wondered if he was still upset with me. I'd pulled out my cell phone several times, but couldn't bring myself to text him either. I was worried that I would be met with hostility, even though he had always been kind and measured with me. Maybe I was projecting. Maybe I was scared he didn't want to date me anymore, since I hadn't been understanding about him having to work. Either way, I needed to get myself together before the benefit dinner tonight. I wiggled into the green dress with a modest neckline and the fashionable slit up the side that I had picked up after finding out I'd be the event planner for this dinner. About an hour before the benefit, I sat down to apply my makeup. I knew I should be more excited, but all I felt was a sense of dread. What if nobody showed up to the dinner? Or worse, what if everyone showed up and the dinner was a disaster? What if it was so bad that they all pulled their donations and took their money elsewhere? That would be on me. The ugly possibilities of various disasters that would be my fault rolled through my brain, one after another. "Pull yourself together," I said, staring at my reflection in the mirror as I swept on blush and secured my cubic zirconia studs in my ears. "It's all going to be fine. You did a great job planning, and everyone is going to love the event." But no matter how I talked myself up, the one person whose opinion I cared about the most wasn't texting me. I started to wonder if I was even going to see him at the hotel tonight. Maybe my bad attitude had made him want to skip the event. Although I wouldn't exactly blame him if that happened, I would feel let down, which was probably how he felt when I hadn't been supportive of his duties last night. Shortly after, I showed up at the hotel 45 minutes before the doors opened to the public, and was relieved to find some people in evening wear already milling about the lobby. So, at least the guests were showing up. Step 1 accomplished. Good job, Michele. I smiled at all of them, and then pushed through the doors to the banquet hall. Everything looked perfect. The tree was glowing, the holly boughs were fragrant, the tablecloths were crisp, and the silverware was sparkling. The brass band was setting up in the corner, running through snatches of holiday songs as they warmed up. It was all I could have possibly hoped for. Except Dylan wasn't here to see it. "He's at the restaurant instead of coming," I said to myself as my heart sank to my feet. Tears stung my eyes. He chose work over me. "Whoever you're talking about," came a familiar voice from behind me, "sounds like he doesn't have his priorities straight. You should kick him to the curb." Every nerve in my body heightened as I slowly turned around to find Dylan standing in front of me, looking absolutely swoontastic in a dark suit and maroon tie that was perfect for the season. He was even wearing a sprig of mistletoe in his breast pocket, as though inviting me into a kiss. "You came," I said, my voice breaking. "My sweet Michele," he said, stepping forward and taking my face in his hands. "Of course I came. I wouldn't miss your big event for the world." "I'm really sorry I wasn't more understanding last night," I said, shaking my head, unable to believe he was here right now. He was really here for me. "Danica's is your restaurant and you're the boss." I was disappointed, but should have understood your point of view as well. "Michele, It's Christmas Eve, Dylan," I said, biting my bottom lip as my vision blurred. "I'm sure the restaurant is packed right now. What are you going to do if there's a crisis at Danica's?" "I took your advice and left somebody else in charge," he said, looking into my eyes seriously. "Problem solved." And I turned my ringer off. Tonight is about you. Any fire that happens at the restaurant can be dealt with by someone else tonight. "Well, that's just perfect," I said, feeling so appreciative as I went up on my tippy toes and gave him a long kiss that made my legs turn to jelly. Finally, I looked up at him. "Wait, why didn't you text me today?" "Granted, I didn't text you either, but I thought maybe you didn't want to talk to me." "Not at all. I was just busy with some Christmas business." "Christmas business? What's that mean?" "You'll see." He gave me a sly smile before he slipped his hand to the small of my back and led me across the festively decorated room toward the big double doors of the banquet hall. "Should we let in our guests?" "Yes," I said, dabbing the tears away from my eyes. Tonight was about the benefit dinner, not about my happy tears. "I think that's a great idea." Chapter 8. The benefit dinner was a roaring success. Everyone was seated in their perfect configurations without a single fight breaking out, and multiple people stopped Dylan as he circled the room to compliment the changes in catering and decor. Yay! I made the rounds, introducing myself to the various tables to make sure that everyone was having a good time. I received so many positive comments about the decor, the ambiance, and the music. People even liked my dollar store centerpiece arrangements. Squeal! I was so swept up in the Christmas cheer and the triumph of my big night that I didn't notice time passing, not until it was almost 2 hours into the party. "Look at how happy everyone is," I said to Dylan as he came over and took my hand. "Thanks to your hard work," Dylan said, his expression sincere. "I appreciate the compliment," I said, pride welling in my chest. "This can't get any better." "I wouldn't count on that," he said, glancing down at his watch with an expression that made me wonder what he was thinking. "The night is still young." Before I had a chance to question him on that point, the doors to the banquet hall swung open and a woman walked in. The whole world stopped spinning and came to a lurching stop. All of a sudden, I couldn't hear the band, or the chatter of the partygoers, or the click of high heels on the hardwood. All I could hear was my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, and all I could see was her. The woman made eye contact with me, and then started walking my way from the doorway. Her hair looked a little grayer than I remembered, but her warm smile was just the same. She wore a simple red wrap dress and a black sequin blazer that I recognized from holiday get-togethers when I was a child. Our means had been modest, and we never had the space to host more than half a dozen people, but she had always handled herself with class and poise. The essential things I'd learned about hosting an event, like how to offer to take a guest's coat at the door, or how to make pleasant small talk, or how to raise a rousing toast, I had learned from her. "Mom?" I said, too stunned to form a complete sentence. "Hi, Jellybean," she said softly, her hands lacing in front of her so tightly the knuckles went white. The waterworks almost started at the sound of my childhood nickname. I'd missed her so much, and relief crashed over me as we stared at each other. But there was a lot about this situation that left questions, and there was a lot between my mother and I that had yet to be resolved. I had to keep it together. This was my party, after all. "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to figure out how to function in this unexpected circumstance. I decided she deserved to be welcomed just like any other guest, so I clasped her hands between my own and gave her a dry-eyed smile. Okay, maybe my eyes were a little watery, but I gave it my best attempt. "Let me find you somewhere to sit." "Oh, I'm sure there isn't room for me," she said, shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. Judging by her modest attire and the out-of-place look on her face, she probably hadn't realized how formal this party would be. "There's always room for you," I said, and this time I did get choked up. I let her go and pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to compose myself. How had this happened? How had she known the event was going on? Had she flown in or had she driven? Who had picked her up from the airport? So many questions flooded my mind. "I don't mean to impose," she said. "I just wanted to tell you Merry Christmas, and a card or a phone call didn't seem like enough, not after everything we've been through. But maybe showing up here was silly of me. You're working after all." It's not silly at all, I said quickly. I touched her elbow lightly, steering her to the side of the room and toward an empty seat. I have time. I was immediately grateful that I had ordered a couple of extra chairs to be brought in, just in case anyone showed up with an unexpected plus one. Or just in case my mother decided to surprise me, as the case may be. Oh, Jellybean, you look so. She took a moment to search for the right word. She was wearing her silver-streaked brown curls up in a simple bun, with a few tendrils left to fly freely around her face. At home, here tonight. Is this really your event? It is, I said, and I couldn't help but beam with pride. Well, I didn't fund the event, but I planned it. The color scheme, the band set list, the menu, the decorations, that was all me. I'm so proud of you, Michele, she said, her voice filled with emotion. This is all you've ever wanted. I'm so sorry I wasn't around to help you with things these last many months, but it looks like you've got everything pretty well handled on your own. I'm sorry too, I said, lowering myself into the chair next to her. The table I had chosen was secluded, pushed into a corner, and the only other occupants had abandoned their seats and plates for the dance floor. We had a little privacy this way, at least. I should have called Mom. I should have apologized sooner. I thought about doing it so many times, but I could just never. Work up the courage, she said, smiling softly in a way that made the lines around her eyes crinkle. I think I can understand a little bit about how that might feel. I'm so glad you're here, I said, the words spilling out of me. Now that we were sharing our feelings, I wasn't sure that I could stop. Before this argument, my mom and I used to share everything. It had felt wrong keeping my worries and joys from her over the last 6 months. I've really missed you, Mom. I've missed you too, she said, pulling me into her arms. I hugged my mom, feeling like everything was right with the world. And then something occurred to me and I pulled back, blinking at her. Wait a minute. I tilted my head as the wheels in my brain whirred. How are you here right now? I mean, how did you even find out the benefit dinner was happening? I had a little bit to do with that, came a masculine voice from behind me. I recognized that voice immediately. I would recognize that voice anywhere, even in a crowded, noisy room. Dylan? I said, turning to look up at the man who had quietly captured my heart. Yep, he said, smiling down at me as he took my hand, rubbing his thumb across my palm in a soothing gesture. You told me that all you wanted for Christmas was your mom back in your life. So I did a little digging and I found her phone number. Tears blurred my vision as I sank back in my chair. You did? He nodded. I half expected her to hang up on me and block my number when I gave her a call out of the blue. But once I explained who I was and how much I cared for her daughter, she was all ears. Dylan was the one who offered to fly me out for the holidays, Mom said, reaching out to take my other hand. I don't think I had ever felt so loved or so safe, having my hands held by the both of them. He didn't pressure me and was perfectly respectful. He made sure I knew it was entirely my choice. My vision blurred even more. Of course, Dylan wouldn't push her. He told me not to come if I wasn't ready to try and have a real relationship with you, she said, sniffing a little. But I knew right away that I wanted to work to heal our wounds. You're very lucky to have someone like this young man in your life. Dylan gave one of his small, crooked smiles, probably at being called a young man. Both of us were fully grown and independent, capable of making our own decisions. But there was still something endearing about her referring to him in that way. You really did that? I said, turning to Dylan. For me? Michele, he said, and there was all the seriousness and tenderness in the world in his voice. There's not much I wouldn't do for you. If it's in my power to make you happy, then I'm going to choose you. His words hit me like a freight train. I took in a shuddering breath, and then the tears that had been building since I laid eyes on my mom finally spilled down my cheeks. My mom pulled me into a hug, and I rested my cheek on her shoulder as I started to cry. "It's okay, Jelly Bean," she said, stroking my hair like she used to do when I was a little girl. "It's okay to cry when the feelings get too big." It was something she had told me since I was a child, crying about an unrequited crush or a friend moving away or cruel name-calling girls on the playground. If anything, her words just made me cry harder. But at the same time, a weighted feeling lifted from my shoulders. "I'm sorry if I upset you, Michele," Dylan said, shifting on his feet. "Don't be silly," I said, giving my mom one more squeeze before I pushed up from my chair and threw my arms around his neck, enfolding him in a tight hug. I breathed in his cedary scent, pressing my face into the crook of his neck. "I'm so grateful for you, Dylan. You're my very own miracle." He moved his mouth close to my ear. "Even if I'm a stick in the mud?" I laughed, joy bubbling up in my chest. "Especially because you're a stick in the mud. In fact, you're my stick in the mud. Those are always the best type of people once you get to know them." "Michele." He stepped back a little, looking more content than I'd ever seen him. "Will you let this stick in the mud take you for a turn on the dance floor?" "Do you mind?" I said, turning to my mom a little nervously. Things were so tender with our reunion that I didn't want to insult her by gallivanting off with my boyfriend minutes after she had arrived in town. "Nothing would make me happier than watching you two be happy together," she said, waving her hands at us. "Go on now and get on that dance floor. It's Christmas, after all. The holidays are for dancing." Giving Dylan a shy smile, I extended my hand to him. He laced our fingers together and led me onto the dance floor, which wasn't as crowded as it had been during the height of the event. Many of the attendees had left already, but we would both be here until the very end of the event, which suited me just fine. I liked dancing with Dylan. I loved the feeling of just the two of us, swaying together as Bing Crosby crooned on about a white Christmas. Being in his arms felt more than exciting, more than calming. It felt a little bit like home. "I hope inviting your mother wasn't overstepping some sort of boundary," he said softly as we danced. I leaned into his broad shoulder, pressing my cheek against the fabric of his jacket. "You just seemed so sad when you talked about her. I wanted to make you happy." "Well, you succeeded in that," I said with a chuckle because that was so putting it mildly. "Although now we have a chaperone." "You're right," he said, lowering his voice as though we were conspiring. "I can't very well whisk you away for the rest of the night now, can I?" "You can certainly try." "No," he said with that small smile I had come to adore. "We have the rest of our lives to run off together. I want to give you quality time with your mother." "The rest of our lives?" I said, my voice a little breathy. I had hoped, of course, that Dylan wanted to keep me for the foreseeable future. I had hoped that he, like me, saw long-term potential in our budding relationship. But I never expected him to speak words like, "the rest of our lives." That felt committed, stable, steady. It felt right. "If you'll have me," he said in that voice that sounded half joking and half serious. "I know I'm an acquired taste." "Well, I've had plenty of time to acquire you," I said, making my voice as bold as I could. This was not the time to be a shrinking violet. This was the time to speak up for what I wanted and chase after all the happiness I'd ever wanted. And I like what I've discovered. "I'm honored," he said, looking more than a little touched. "You're the answer to everything I've been hoping for, Dylan," I said, taking a deep breath and wondering if right now I'd have the courage to tell him how I really felt. The image of a blue sky and white cloud-fettered meme floated through my mind, and 4 words echoed through my brain. "If not now, when?" "You were right in front of me the whole time," I said, ready to open my heart to this man who had encouraged me to take the first steps toward the career I'd always wanted, which, it turned out, I'd done beautifully. I can't believe it took us this long to realize. "Hey, it's okay. He touched my chin with his knuckle, tipping my face up so my eyes met his. I'm a firm believer that good things take the time they need to happen. I wouldn't change a single thing about how we found each other, because in the end, I have you. Oh, Dylan, I said, thinking I could spend my whole life saying that name and never get tired of it. You make me so happy. He smiled before dipping his head in the most adorable way and capturing my mouth with his own. I made a happy noise of contentment, and his mouth caressed mine. This was my home, right here in his arms. I was surprised when he pulled away. I have to admit something, he said, looking down at me with a strange sort of earnestness in his eyes. What do you mean? I asked, feeling nervous all of a sudden. Was he going to tell me we were going too fast? Had he realized that his being my boss was some kind of ethical violation? If so, I was definitely ready to quit. No problem at all. I took a deep breath, ready to give my 2 weeks' notice. What's going on? Just tell me. I've been keeping one more Christmas secret, he said, his mouth twisting from side to side. And it's a big one. But I'm ready to share it with you. Please do, I said, my voice barely louder than a whisper. Dylan stepped back, and the world felt colder in the absence of his touch. Then, to my absolute surprise, he dropped down onto one knee right in the middle of the dance floor. No way, I said, my heart pounding in my chest. This isn't happening. It's happening, Dylan said, reaching into his breast pocket and pulling out a small red velvet box. But only if you want this too. Say the word and I'll stop. I put my hand to my mouth, my throat tightening. This couldn't be real, considering the fact that we were currently being watched by some of the town's biggest donors and luminaries, not to mention my own mother and, of course, reporters from the papers. Small town or not, no matter what my response would be, news of this little stunt would be circulating around town like wildfire first thing tomorrow morning. I usually wasn't one for the spotlight, but right now, I didn't care how many people were or weren't watching us. I only cared about the man kneeling in front of me, looking up at me with those eyes that were so easy for me to get lost in. I'm not going to tell you to stop, I said, clasping my hands together in front of me, mostly to keep them from shaking at my sides. My legs were totally spaghetti right now. How should a gal react when her boss surprise proposed to her in the middle of the Christmas party she had planned? It wasn't exactly something one anticipated. Michele, Dylan began, flipping the box open to reveal an intricately designed vintage engagement ring. The band looked like twining flowers, enclosing a diamond in the center that gleamed like a star. It was simple and modest, and the most beautiful ring I had ever seen. Spending time with you is the happiest I've felt in my life, he said. I gasped a little. He was really doing this. I needed to pinch myself, but I was frozen in place, spellbound by what he might say next. I can honestly say that I've been taken with you ever since I met you, he said, revealing a shocking little tidbit that I never would have guessed. But it's been watching you come to life doing what you love to do and working with you on this benefit that has really shown me that my life just isn't complete without you. My heart flipped in my chest. I feel the same way about you. The corner of his mouth lifted before his face sobered, ever the serious man. If given the chance, I promise to spend my life caring for you and keeping you safe and making you laugh, no matter what. I didn't think love could be like this, but the truth is, you are home to me. Dylan. I breathed in deeply, tears springing to my eyes. I glanced over his shoulder momentarily to find my mother watching us from her chair. She was completely crying right now, but there was a huge smile on her face. So, what do you say? He tilted his head, questioning me with his earnest expression and seeming to hold his breath. Will you experience the journey of life with me? Will you marry me? We hadn't been seeing each other for long, but we had known each other for years, and he had always felt like a solid presence for me. Whenever I needed help or a shoulder to cry on, Dylan had been there. We had gone through countless slammed dinner shifts together and shared hundreds of quick meals in the kitchen. When I'd gone through a breakup, Dylan had listened to me complain in the back room of the restaurant, passing me tissues and giving me support. I remembered when Dylan's ex had left him, and he started showing up to work earlier and leaving later with sleepless bags under his eyes. We hadn't been close per se because he'd kept a professional distance. But at the same time, we knew each other's character as well as anyone, even though it had taken us a little longer than some to realize that we were in love. When I imagined a future, I could only see it with Dylan, and this felt better than right. It felt meant to be. "Yes," I said, a tear spilling down my cheek. "Yes, Dylan, I'll marry you." He let out a whoosh of relief, stood on both feet, and pulled me into his arms. He pressed the sweetest, gentlest kiss to my mouth, not seeming to care that my tears kept falling down my cheeks, or that everyone in the room was watching us. As if on cue, a smattering of applause rose up from the benefit guests, the sound echoing through the room along with "All I Want for Christmas Is You" by Mariah Carey. I didn't even mind the audience. I was just happy to be Dylan's, and I was happy he was mine. I laughed with joy, throwing my gaze at the ceiling in delight, and spotted a small green bouquet with white berries and red sash above us. "Merry Christmas, Michele," Dylan said, rocking me back and forth in his arms. "Merry Christmas, Dylan," I said, then pushed up on my tiptoes for another kiss under the mistletoe with the man I loved, the man of my dreams. Epilogue. 1 year later. "Your doorbell is ringing," I said, calling loudly from the kitchen as I bent over the oven, rescuing the perfectly glazed Christmas ham from the heat. 5 more minutes in the oven, and it would have dried out. Yikes. "I'll get it," Dylan said from the front room where he was stoking a cozy, crackling fire. The fireplace was perhaps my favorite feature of Dylan's tiny house where we planned to live once we were married. Currently, I spend a lot of time here, and Dylan also came to my place quite a bit. But since his place was bigger, we decided to host the holiday dinners here. Some people said we had gotten engaged too fast, but I kept telling them, when you know, you know. I knew immediately that I wanted to spend a lifetime with Dylan, and a year later, I still loved being engaged and couldn't wait to marry him. It didn't hurt that my mother, exhausted of Cincinnati life, had fallen in love with our little town and had moved to a little community just down the road. Her support and love meant the world to me, and with her on my side, it didn't matter what anyone else had to say. "Where did the butter disappear to?" Mom asked, craning her neck around as she stirred her famous mashed potatoes on the stovetop. "I just had it a moment ago." "Here you go, Mom," I said, depositing a peck on her cheek as I passed her the ceramic dish of butter shaped like an ear of corn. She shook her head at my antics but smiled as she mixed butter into the potatoes. "A lot of butter. You can't have too much." "Is that the secret family recipe?" I asked, eyeballing her handiwork. "Just tons and tons of butter?" "Plus some spices," she said with a shrug. "But the real secret ingredient is a dollop of sour cream. Grab it for me out of the fridge, will you?" "Come in, Holly," Dylan said, his voice trailing in from the front door. "Hi, Dave. Welcome, welcome. Bring those kiddos inside and out of the cold." I wasn't surprised that Holly and Dave had arrived half an hour early. They insisted on helping set the table and bringing their own famous green bean casserole, which would undoubtedly complete the Christmas party meal. Christmas Eve was still a few days away, and so was the big benefit dinner I had been put permanently in charge of running. But I had gone out of my way to squeeze in this festive dinner with friends before everyone went their separate ways for the holidays. "Something smells good," Holly said, coming into the kitchen and leaning in to give me a big hug. "I think the ham turned out perfect," I said, giving her a big squeeze. "I'm sure it will be," she said, balancing Joe on her hip, as he happily chewed away at a soft plastic dinosaur toy. "What smells good in here?" Dave said, coming in and letting Sophia walk a few shaky steps with her hands firmly grasped in his, before scooping her up as well. Could be the ham or the mashed potatoes, Mom said, smiling down at Sophia as she waddled toward her with a big grin on her adorable face. She's learning her way around on those cute little legs, I said, remembering that last year I'd wanted to give her the advice of pursuing her dreams and not waiting. Didn't look like I needed to worry. This little person would be a go-getter for sure. I switched the oven down to the right temperature to heat up the green bean casserole. You're mobile, little lady. It's wild to think she was this tiny infant just a year ago, Dave said, taking a seat at the table and holding out his arms as she waddled toward him. He wore a look of love on his face. Now she's our speed racer, aren't you, Sophia? Sophia let out an incomprehensible string of babble, but I thought I caught something that sounded suspiciously like "dada" in there. She was a quick study, all right. I would bet good money that she would be forming full sentences soon. My mother cooed at Sophia and scooped her out of Dave's arms. Dylan and I were still kicking around the idea of having kids ourselves one day, but we were in no hurry, and in the meantime my mother busied herself spoiling Holly and Dave's kids. Are we the first ones here? Dave asked, leaning over me to inhale the scent of the ham. I busied myself whisking the mashed potatoes on the stove. Sure are, Dylan said, raking his fingers through his thick wavy hair. I wanted so much to tangle my fingers in that hair and give him a big kiss, but we had company, so I did my best to play it cool. We were still expecting some mutual friends from the restaurant, as well as two of Dylan's fishing buddies. I'd also invited a couple I'd met through my business, Bright Ideas Event Planning. But it wasn't easy being social while single-handedly running a small business. It was easy to never stop working and to lose myself in my commitment to grow my business and making it profitable. My doors had only been open for 6 months, but I had already planned 2 weddings, a bar mitzvah, and multiple birthday parties. I was getting the reputation around town as a reliable, creative event planner who could stretch a budget farther than most, and I was incredibly proud of that reputation. But you deserve rest and fun too, Dylan would always tell me. Take it from someone who learned it the hard way, there's more to life than work. I took a moment to take a deep breath and be grateful for this moment, for these friends and family members, for Dylan's warm eyes and baby babble to the kiddos, my mother cooking in my kitchen, and Holly grinning up at Dave. Work could wait for another day. Tonight was about celebrating the holiday season with loved ones. I'm so happy you guys could make it, I said, looking at Holly as I stepped aside to let Dylan slice up the ham. I'm surprised you aren't spending the season with Dave's family out of state. I lowered my voice. Is everything okay? With them? Oh, everything is fine, she said, her face lighting up. They adore little Joe and Sophia, and I'm happy to say that they seem to love me too. We had such a good time with them last Christmas that we invited them to visit us in Montana this year, and they're currently en route. It turned out I just needed to relax and be myself around them, and then everything was all right. There was so much love in their hearts just waiting for me. That's how it goes most of the time, Mom said with a warm smile. Sometimes folks just need a little push to open their arms to you, and then you're in the family for life. That's exactly how it went, Holly said, slinging an arm over my mother's shoulder and pulling her into a hug. I'm so happy you're here for Christmas. I'm happy too, Mom said, reaching out to pat my hand. I caught myself getting a little misty-eyed, then quickly dabbed at my tears with the corner of my apron and shook myself back into composure. No crying for Christmas, I said, eliciting a laugh from everyone in the room since I was clearly all emotional right now. Come on, let's get this table set. We all gathered around the table and set out the plates and silverware. As we worked, the doorbell kept ringing, and other friends trickled in until we had a full house. And when it was finally time to eat, we all held hands around the table and went in a circle, saying what we were thankful for. Unsurprisingly, most people there were grateful for each other. I'm grateful for my wonderful fiancé, Dylan said when it was his turn. He squeezed my hand and I smiled up at him. I can't wait until she's my wife. And I'm sure she can't wait to plan our wedding. A ripple of laughter went around the room. In truth, I've had the colors picked out since the week he proposed, I said, unable to resist getting in a little quip of my own. More beautiful laughter ensued. Holly smoothed back little Joe's curls from his face as he sat in his high chair, and Sophia clapped her little hands together in Dave's lap, as though she were in on the joke. My friend Lee giggled behind her hand, and Dylan's fishing buddies guffawed and shook him lovingly by the shoulder. My mother beamed from the head of the table, her glass of wine cradled in her hand, and the girls from the restaurant let out a little cheer, as though they had been rooting for me and Dylan all along. I wanted to capture the moment in a Christmas ornament so I could look back on it for years to come, just like the Christmas mountain snow globe ornaments Dylan and I had bought for each other last year. When can we look forward to the nuptials? Mom asked, waggling her eyebrows. I laced my fingers through Dylan's and smiled up at him, content in the knowledge that we had so many more years and so many more holidays ahead of us, but the next one would be the most special one yet. We were thinking of a winter wedding, I said, feeling a glow spread across my chest at what Dylan and I had decided. Mark your calendars for Christmas time next year. As everyone around us cheered and squealed now that we finally had a wedding date, I couldn't help thinking what a difference a year made. And then I remembered that little blue sky and white cloud fettered meme that I'd seen on social media last year that had read, "If not now, when?" After that, I'd started taking steps toward my dream, and then everything else had fallen into place, as if helped by the magic of Christmas. I was now working in the career I'd always wanted. I was going to marry the man of my dreams, and I had love all around me. My heart was full as I turned to look at Dylan and found his gaze already on me. I giggled from sheer happiness as he leaned toward me and sealed our future with a kiss. The end. If you enjoyed spending time with these characters, be sure to listen to Lacey's story in A Sugar Plum Christmas, the Mistletoe Book Club Series, Book 1.